A 10-year-old girl walked into a room full of bikers carrying a glass jar filled with coins. Her hands were shaking. Her shoes were soaked through from 3 blocks of walking in January slush. She didn't ask for food. She didn't ask for warmth. She set that jar on the counter in front of a scarred ex-Marine with oil-stained knuckles and tattoos crawling up both sides of his neck. And she said 5 words that stopped every conversation in the room dead. "Is this enough to save my mom?" Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. What happened next inside that clubhouse would set fire to a chain of events that no one in the town of Harlan Falls was prepared for. And by the end of it, not everyone would walk away whole. If this story grabs you, stay until the very last second. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me what city you're watching from. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. The wind came off the ridge like something with teeth. It tore through the parking lot of the Iron Haven Riders Clubhouse at 6:40 in the morning, rattling the chain-link fence and peeling rust from the old neon sign above the entrance. The sign read Iron Haven in letters that hadn't been fully lit in 4 years. The H and the V flickered in the cold, casting half a word into the gray January dark. Inside, the building smelled like it always did on Saturday mornings. Black coffee brewed too strong, bacon grease popping on a flat-top griddle, engine oil soaked into every surface that couldn't be scrubbed clean. The floors were concrete. The walls were paneled in wood that had seen decades of cigarette smoke and boot scuffs. A jukebox in the corner hadn't played a song since somebody put a fist through the speaker in 2019. Nobody fixed it. Nobody wanted to. Ryder Boone stood behind the counter with a spatula in one hand and a coffee mug in the other. He was 44 years old, 6'2". Built like a man who had spent the first half of his life carrying things too heavy for one person. Rucksacks, ammunition crates, the weight of 3 combat deployments that never fully left his shoulders. A scar ran from the corner of his left eyebrow down past his cheekbone, the skin puckered and faded white against the darker tan of his face. He didn't talk about where it came from. He didn't talk about most things. Saturday mornings were community breakfast. That was the rule. Open doors, free food, no questions. Families from the neighborhood filed in. Single mothers with toddlers on their hips, old men in work jackets who couldn't afford heat, teenagers who came for the eggs and stayed because nobody yelled at them here. The Iron Haven Riders weren't a social program. They didn't have a mission statement or a tax-exempt status. They were 12 men and 3 women who rode motorcycles, paid their own bills, and had all survived something that broke them in ways polite society didn't want to look at. But every Saturday, they opened the doors and fed whoever showed up. Ryder flipped bacon, steam rose. The fluorescent light above the griddle buzzed and flickered. That was when the door opened and the cold came in like a third person entering the room. She was small. That was the first thing anyone noticed. Not just young, small in the way that children look when they haven't been eating enough, when their bodies carry the evidence of months of something wrong. Her coat was too thin. A green windbreaker zipped to her chin, the kind you'd wear in September, not January. Her shoes were canvas sneakers with no socks visible above the rubber soles. They were soaked. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a ponytail that had been done in a hurry, strands escaping on both sides of her face. She carried a glass jar in both hands, pressed against her stomach like she was afraid someone would take it from her. The jar was filled with coins, quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies, packed so tight that nothing shifted when she walked. The weight of it pulled her shoulders forward. She crossed the room without looking at anyone, her eyes fixed on the counter, on Ryder, on the man with the scar and the spatula who hadn't noticed her yet. She set the jar down. The glass hit the counter with a dull, heavy sound. Ryder looked up. The spatula stopped midair. Behind him, Mara Quinn, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed and a toothpick between her teeth, straightened slowly. "Is this enough to save my mom?" The girl's voice didn't shake. That was what made it worse. She asked the question the way you ask for directions or the time, like she had rehearsed it, like she had spent nights whispering it into her pillow until the words lost their edges and became just another sentence. She was 10 years old, and she had already learned how to flatten her own fear into something functional. That's not a skill children should have. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something cracks open in the middle of ordinary life. Ryder set down the spatula. He didn't crouch. He didn't kneel. He pulled out the stool behind the counter and sat so his eyes were level with hers. He didn't smile. He didn't soften. He just looked at her the way a man looks at someone when he already knows the answer is going to cost him something. Save her from what? The girl blinked once, twice. From him. Mara pushed off the wall. She moved without sound, a habit from years of living in places where making noise got you hurt. She was 37, lean, with sharp cheekbones and a jaw that set hard when she was listening to something that pulled old scars open. She'd come to the Iron Haven 6 years ago with a split lip and a duffel bag and hadn't left since. She didn't talk about what she left behind either. Nobody at Iron Haven asked. That was the second rule. First rule was Saturday breakfast. Second rule was, you don't make people explain their damage. Mara stopped 3 feet from the girl. She didn't touch her. She didn't bend down. She stood still and let the girl decide whether to keep talking. Her name was Lena Cross. She was 10. She went to Harlan Falls Elementary. She lived in a house on Ridgecrest Lane with her mother, Angie, and a man named Brent Mercer. She didn't call Brent her stepfather. She didn't call him anything. The words came out in small, careful pieces, like she was handing over something breakable. Her mother had bruises she covered with long sleeves. The walls in the house had marks where things had been thrown. Some nights Lena slept in her closet because the yelling was too close. Some mornings her mother moved like her ribs hurt, but she never said anything and Lena never asked because asking made it worse. Brent smiled at the neighbors. Brent coached baseball at the rec center. Brent shook hands at the hardware store and people called him a good guy. Lena stopped talking. She put her hand on top of the jar. I saved it myself, she said. From the sidewalk and the couch cushions and the fountain at the mall. Mom doesn't know. Ryder stared at the jar. He could feel the whole room behind him. The families at the tables, the riders near the back, the old men with their coffee cups frozen halfway to their mouths. He could feel Mara beside him, rigid as rebar, her breathing deliberately slow. He reached out and put his hand flat on the counter next to the jar. Not on it. Next to it. You walked here? He asked. Yes. And this? It's only 3 blocks. Does your mom know you're here? A pause. Then, no. Mara's jaw tightened. She looked at Ryder. Their eyes met for less than a second, but in that second, an entire conversation passed between them. The kind of conversation that doesn't need words, that runs on shared damage and the unspoken understanding that some things can't be fixed with volume or speed. Ryder looked back at Lena. You keep that jar, he said. That's yours. But that's yours, Lena. The girl stared at him like she was trying to decide if he was lying. Then her chin trembled once, just once, and she pressed her lips together and pushed the trembling back down the way she'd been trained to do. Back into the dark. Back into the silence. Mara moved first. She pulled a chair to the nearest table, set a plate of eggs and toast and bacon in front of it, and looked at Lena. Sit, she said. Not harsh, not gentle, just direct. The way you talk to someone who needs solid ground more than sympathy. Lena sat. She ate with the focus of a child who didn't know when the next meal would come without tension attached to it. Ryder didn't go back to the griddle. He stood at the counter and watched the parking lot through the window. The empty road, the wind shaking the bare trees, the gray sky pressing down on the town like a hand. His coffee had gone cold. He didn't notice. Behind the counter, on the shelf next to the first aid kit and the logbook and the old rotary phone that hadn't worked since the 90s, there was a framed photograph of a boy, 7 years old in the picture. Blonde hair, gap-toothed grin, red jacket. The frame was dusty. Ryder never cleaned it, but he never moved it either. Nobody asked about the photograph. Rule number 2. He turned away from the window and looked at Mara. I need you to go talk to her mother. I know. Not today, not yet. She can't know Lena came here. I know how this works, Ryder. There was an edge in her voice, not anger, something older, something worn smooth by repetition. She had been the woman behind the closed door once. She knew the choreography of survival inside a house that was supposed to be safe, but wasn't. She knew how the walls changed shape at night. She knew how you learned to read footsteps. The weight of them, the speed, the pause before the door opened. She knew what it cost to smile at the neighbors the morning after. She also knew that rushing in would get Angie killed. That was the thing civilians never understood, the thing movies got wrong. You don't kick down the door, you don't charge in on motorcycles with fists raised, you don't confront the man in public and expect the woman to be safe when the cameras turn off. Brent Mercer was a volcano. Every confrontation was pressure added to the chamber. The eruption wouldn't happen in front of witnesses. It would happen at midnight, behind a locked bedroom door, with no one close enough to hear. Patience was the hardest kind of violence, the kind you turned inward, the kind that ate at your ribs while you waited and watched and planned something quiet enough that the ground didn't shake until you wanted it to. Ryder pulled his phone from his back pocket. He scrolled through contacts and stopped at a name. Dale Crenshaw, the Harlan County Sheriff. He stared at the name for a long time, then put the phone away. He'd called Dale Crenshaw 18 months ago about a different situation. Different family, different man, same pattern. Dale had said, "We'll look into it." 3 weeks later, the woman showed up at the hospital with a broken orbital bone, and the man posted bail the same afternoon. Dale said, "These domestic things are complicated." Ryder had stood in the hospital corridor looking at x-rays that showed fractures in 3 stages of healing and thought about all the ways the word complicated could be used to avoid the word coward. He didn't call Dale this time. Instead, he walked to the back office, a room the size of a closet with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a wall map of Harlan County with push pins marking nothing in particular. He sat in the chair, put his elbows on the desk, and pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw static. The photograph on the shelf outside. The blonde boy. The red jacket. That was rule number 3, and only Ryder knew it. Never let it happen to another kid. The next morning, Mara Quinn pulled her truck into the parking lot of Harlan Falls Family Services. Not on a motorcycle. Not in a leather jacket. She wore a gray sweater and jeans and boots that didn't have steel toes. She looked like anyone. That was the point. The office was a single-story brick building on Main Street, wedged between a laundromat and a tax preparation storefront that only opened from January to April. The waiting room had plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting and a front desk staffed by a woman named Deborah, who looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. Mara didn't sit. She stood near the rack of pamphlets and pretended to read one about nutrition assistance while she waited for Deborah to finish a phone call. The pamphlet was 4 years old. The phone number on the back had been disconnected. "Can I help you?" Deborah asked without looking up from her screen. "I'm looking for information about support resources for a friend. Domestic situation. She has a child." "Has she filed a report?" "No." "Has she contacted law enforcement?" "No." Deborah looked up then. Her eyes were tired but not unkind. Just worn down in the way people get when they've heard the same story 400 times, and the system they work inside gives them a pamphlet and a phone number and nothing else. "We can provide referrals to the county shelter," Deborah said. "There's a 21-day maximum stay. After that, she'd need to apply for transitional housing, but the wait list is—" She paused, swallowed. "Long." "How long?" 7 months, minimum." Mara put the pamphlet back on the rack. She looked at the wall behind Deborah where a poster read in bold blue letters, "You're not alone." Beneath it, someone had taped a handwritten sign. "Due to budget cuts, walk-in hours are now limited to Tuesday and Thursday, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. 7 months, Mara repeated. "I'm sorry," Deborah said. And she meant it. That was the worst part. She meant it, and it didn't change anything. Mara walked out. The wind hit her at the parking lot, and she stood there for a full minute, hands in her pockets, staring at the laundromat next door where a woman was folding towels through the window. Normal life. Ordinary movement. The world continuing its rotation while somewhere on Ridgecrest Lane, a 10-year-old girl was sleeping in her closet. She got in the truck. She didn't start the engine yet. She sat with her hands on the steering wheel and her jaw locked and her breathing measured. In through the nose, hold, out through the mouth. The way the therapist at the VA taught her before she stopped going. Then she pulled out her phone and texted Ryder 2 words. "Systems broken." His reply came in 4 seconds. "I know. Come back." 3 days later, Mara made contact with Angie Cross. Not at the house. Never at the house. She chose the Shop and Save on Route 9, Aisle 7, canned goods and pasta. Mara had spent 2 days mapping Angie's routine, following the movements without being seen. She knew what time Angie dropped Lena at school. She knew what time Angie went to the grocery store. She knew that Angie always went alone on Wednesday mornings because Brent worked the early shift at the fabrication plant and wouldn't be home until 4. Mara pushed a cart she didn't need down aisle 7 and stopped next to a woman reaching for a can of tomato sauce on the top shelf. Angie Cross was 33. She looked older, not from age, from the kind of erosion that happens when your body stays in fight or flight for years. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes moved constantly, scanning the ends of the aisle, tracking the footsteps behind her, checking exits. She wore a long-sleeved flannel shirt in a heated store. Her wrists stayed covered. "Need a hand?" Mara said, reaching for the can and setting it in Angie's cart. "Thanks." Angie didn't make eye contact. She started to push her cart forward. "I'm Mara. I work with a group that runs community breakfasts on Saturdays, over near the old industrial park." Angie stopped. Didn't turn around. "I've seen your daughter there," Mara said carefully. "Lena." The cart handle creaked under Angie's grip. Her knuckles went white. When she turned, her face held the careful blankness of a woman who had spent years making sure the wrong expression never showed at the wrong moment. "Lena she wouldn't go somewhere without telling me." "She came in to eat," Mara said. "That's all. We feed anyone who walks through the door." The lie was small and necessary. The truth, that Lena had walked 3 blocks in freezing rain carrying a jar of coins and asked a stranger to save her mother, would have detonated the situation. It would have sent Angie into a spiral of guilt and panic, and Brent would have read it on her face within seconds of walking through the door. Men like Brent read faces the way meteorologists read radar. They knew the storm before it arrived. Angie stared at Mara for a long time. Something moved behind her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but something smaller. Recognition. The way one wounded animal identifies another. "She shouldn't be going out alone," Angie said finally. "No," Mara agreed. "She shouldn't have to." The sentence hung between them like a wire pulled tight. Angie's mouth opened slightly, closed. She gripped the cart handle again and started walking. Mara didn't follow. She stood in aisle 7 with her empty cart and watched Angie move toward the registers. Watched the way she checked over her shoulder twice before she reached the end of the aisle. Watched the way her left arm stayed tucked close to her body, protecting the ribs on that side. Back at the clubhouse that evening, Ryder asked one question. "Did she hear you?" "She heard me." "Did she run?" "No, she didn't run." Ryder nodded. He went back to cleaning a carburetor at the workbench, his hands moving with the mechanical precision of a man who needed something to do with his fingers while his mind worked through problems that didn't have clean solutions. Mara sat on the edge of the pool table and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through the contacts until she found a name she hadn't used in 2 years. Janine Ford, Regional Advocate, Women's Crisis Network. She didn't call yet. She saved the number to her favorites and put the phone down. "How bad?" Ryder asked without looking up. "She's guarding her left side. She checks exits. She flinched when a stock boy dropped a crate behind her." "How long?" "Long enough that her daughter learned to sleep in a closet." Ryder's hands stopped moving. The carburetor sat in pieces on the bench. He stared at the wall, at the calendar pinned there, January, a stock photo of a snowy mountain that had nothing to do with anything. He stared at it the way you stare at a wall when what you're really seeing is somewhere else entirely. "We go slow," he said. "We go slow," Mara agreed. But both of them knew the truth that lived underneath the strategy and the patience and the careful, measured approach. They knew it because they'd lived it, because they'd seen the math before. The slower you go, the more time the bomb has to detonate on its own. 5 days later, Brent Mercer came home early. He pulled his truck into the driveway at 1:47 in the afternoon, 2 hours and 13 minutes before his shift was supposed to end. Angie was in the kitchen. Lena was still at school. The house was quiet. The curtains were drawn. From the outside, the house on Ridgecrest Lane looked like every other house on the block. Vinyl siding, chain-link fence, an American flag decal peeling on the front window. Nobody saw what happened inside. But at 3:15, when Lena walked home from the bus stop and turned onto Ridgecrest Lane, she saw something that made her stop at the end of the driveway. Her father's truck, Brent's truck, was parked at an angle, the driver's door still open. The engine was off, but the headlights were on, cutting two weak beams into the pale afternoon light. The front door of the house was open too. Not wide, just a few inches, enough for the cold to get in, enough for sound to get out. Lena stood on the sidewalk with her backpack hanging from one shoulder and her hands balled inside the pockets of her green windbreaker. She didn't move. She had learned stillness the way soldiers learn it, not as calm, but as calculation. She was reading the scene, the truck door, the headlights, the open front door, the silence that was worse than yelling because silence meant it was already over or it was about to begin. She didn't go inside. She turned and walked the other direction. 3 blocks. Into the wind. Past the laundromat and the tax office and the shop and save. Past the dead lawns and the parked sedans and the fire hydrant on the corner of Mill Street where someone had tied a faded yellow ribbon that nobody remembered the reason for anymore. She walked until she reached the parking lot with the chain-link fence and the flickering neon sign that said Iron Haven with the H and V blinking like a code she didn't know how to read. She pushed through the door. Ryder was alone behind the counter. No Saturday breakfast, no families. Just the empty tables and the cold fluorescent lights and the smell of coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. He looked up. Lena was standing in the doorway. No jar this time. No coins. No rehearsed sentence. Her face was white. Her lips were pressed together so tight they'd lost all color. Her eyes were dry, but something behind them was shaking. Something structural, something load-bearing, something that if it broke would bring everything else down with it. Lena. She didn't answer. She walked to the nearest chair and sat down and put her backpack on the table and folded her hands on top of it and stared at the far wall. Ryder came around the counter. He pulled a chair to the table, not across from her, not next to her, but at the corner, close enough to be present, far enough not to crowd. He sat. He didn't ask questions. He didn't reach for her. He sat the way a man sits when he knows that the next few minutes matter more than the last 10 years, and the only thing he can do right is nothing. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Then Lena said, in a voice so small it barely made it past her teeth, "His truck door was open." Ryder's hands closed into fists beneath the table. "And the front door? Open? Where's your mom?" Lena didn't answer. She stared at the wall. Her fingers pressed harder against the backpack fabric. Her shoulders pulled inward, shrinking, making herself a smaller target the way she'd learned to do in hallways and corners, and the space between the closet door and the back wall where she pressed herself flat and breathed through her mouth so she couldn't be heard. Ryder stood up. He pulled his phone out and dialed Mara. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He hung up, dialed again. Voicemail. He looked at Lena. He looked at the door. He looked at the shelf behind the counter where the photograph of the blonde boy in the red jacket sat in its dusty frame, and for a moment his face did something it almost never did. It showed everything. Every deployment. Every door he'd kicked open too late. Every silence on the other side of a wall that meant something he couldn't undo. Then the face closed again. Hard. Set. A decision made behind the eyes that nobody would ever hear spoken out loud. He picked up the keys to his motorcycle from the hook by the door. "Stay here," he told Lena. "Don't open the door for anyone. Not anyone. Do you understand?" She nodded. He stepped into the parking lot. The wind hit him full in the chest. His boots crunched on the frozen gravel as he walked toward his bike. A flat black Harley with no chrome, no flash, just function. He threw his leg over the seat and hit the ignition, and the engine roared to life in the cold January air, shaking the silence apart. He pulled onto the road. 3 blocks to Ridgecrest Lane. And he had no idea what he was about to find on the other side of that open door. Ryder killed the engine at the corner of Ridgecrest Lane and let the Harley coast the last 40 yards on momentum alone. The tires whispered against frozen asphalt. He didn't want the sound announcing him. He didn't want Brent Mercer hearing a motorcycle engine and calculating how many seconds he had before someone reached the front door. The truck was exactly where Lena described it. Driver's door open. Headlights still burning, weaker now as the battery drained into the cold air. The front door of the house stood ajar. 3, maybe 4 inches. And through the gap came nothing. No voices, no television, no movement, just the thin gray light of a January afternoon leaking into a hallway that should have been warm. Ryder swung his leg off the bike and stood on the sidewalk. His boots pressed into a thin layer of ice that cracked beneath his weight. He didn't move toward the house. He stood there and read the scene the way he'd been trained to read terrain in Helmand Province. Entry points, sight lines, obstacles, unknowns. The truck door bothered him. A man who leaves his truck door open isn't planning. He's reacting. He arrived in a state that didn't allow for the ordinary sequence of park, turn off engine, close door, walk inside. He arrived already detonating. Ryder's phone buzzed in his jacket. Mara. "Where are you?" Her voice was tight, controlled, the voice of someone who already knew the answer. "Ridgecrest. Don't go in. Truck's open, front door's open. Lena's at the clubhouse." A pause. He could hear her breathing change, the measured rhythm breaking for half a second before she pulled it back. "Is there sound?" "Nothing." "Ryder, don't go in that house." "I'm not going in. I'm standing on the sidewalk." "Stay there. I'm 11 minutes out." She hung up. Ryder pocketed the phone and stared at the house. The American flag decal on the front window was peeling at the top corner, curling inward like something trying to hide its own face. A child's bicycle leaned against the fence, purple, with a white basket, one training wheel still attached, even though Lena was too old for training wheels. Nobody had taken it off. Nobody had noticed, or nobody had cared, or the person who should have cared was busy surviving and didn't have the energy left for training wheels. A sound came from inside the house, not loud, not a scream or a crash, or anything that would justify a phone call to a dispatcher. Just a sound, a drawer closing, or a cabinet shutting, or something being set down on a hard surface with controlled force. The kind of sound that in any other house would mean nothing. But in this house, on this afternoon, with the truck door hanging open and the headlights bleeding into the winter air, it meant someone was moving. Someone was inside. Someone was doing something they didn't want heard. Ryder's hands curled at his sides, his left thumb pressed against the knuckle of his index finger. A tic he'd carried since his second deployment, a thing his body did when his brain was running scenarios faster than his mouth could process. Then the front door opened wider, and Brent Mercer stepped onto the porch. He was average height, average build. Brown hair cut short, the kind of haircut that said nothing about the man wearing it. He wore a work jacket from the fabrication plant, the name Mercer, stitched above the left pocket in yellow thread. His hands were in his pockets. His face was calm, not the forced calm of someone hiding something, the genuine, terrifying calm of someone who believed completely in his own version of events. Whatever had just happened inside that house, Brent Mercer had already rewritten it in his head. The story was finished. The narrative was set. He was the reasonable one. He was the one who kept things together. He was the one everyone liked at the hardware store. He saw Ryder and stopped. The two men looked at each other across 20 feet of frozen lawn. Brent's eyes went to the motorcycle parked at the curb, then back to Ryder's face, then to the scar, then to the patches on the leather jacket. Iron Haven riders across the back, visible even from the porch. "Help you with something?" Brent said. His voice was friendly, neighborly, the voice of a man who coached baseball at the rec center and knew how to hold a handshake 2 seconds longer than necessary. "Just checking on the neighborhood," Ryder said. "That right?" "Community thing. We do it." Brent nodded slowly. He took his hands out of his pockets. They were clean, no marks, no swelling. That didn't mean anything. Men who had been doing this for years knew where to hit without leaving evidence on their own skin. "My wife's inside," Brent said. "She's fine. Having a rest. Wasn't feeling well today." "Sorry to hear that." "Flu going around." "Yeah." They stood there, the wind moved between them, carrying ice crystals and the smell of exhaust from somewhere down the block. Ryder didn't blink. Brent didn't either. It was the kind of silence that isn't empty. It's loaded, pressurized. Two men standing on opposite sides of a truth that one of them would never admit and the other couldn't prove. Brent smiled. It reached his mouth, but not his eyes. "Well," he said, "appreciate you keeping an eye out." He turned and walked back inside. The door closed. The lock clicked, a deliberate sound meant to be heard. Ryder stood on the sidewalk for another 30 seconds. Then he walked back to his bike, threw his leg over, and rode 2 blocks north before pulling into the parking lot of a closed gas station. He killed the engine and sat in the cold and waited. Mara's truck appeared 9 minutes later. She pulled in next to him and rolled down the window. Her face was set hard, her eyes scanning him the way a medic scans for wounds. "What happened?" "He came out. He smiled at me, said his wife had the flu." Mara's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Did you see her?" "No." "Did you hear her?" "No." "Then we don't know." "We know, Mara. We don't know enough for anything that holds up." Ryder looked at the gas station, the boarded windows, the disconnected pumps, the sign advertising prices from 3 years ago. Everything in this town was broken and nobody fixed anything. They just boarded it up and drove past. "Lena's at the clubhouse," he said. "She can't go home tonight. If we keep her, that's a problem. She's not ours. He'll report her missing." "He won't report anything. He doesn't want cops near that house any more than we do." Mara was quiet. She stared through the windshield at the gray nothing ahead. "What are you thinking?" Ryder asked. "I'm thinking about the last time we did this." The words landed between them like a dropped blade. Ryder's jaw tightened. The last time. 18 months ago. Different woman, different house, different man, same town, same sheriff, same system that moved like mud while the clock ran out. They had been patient then too. They had been strategic. They had followed every rule and contacted every agency and filed every report and waited. And a woman named Christine Hale ended up in the ICU with a ruptured spleen and an orbital fracture and a 7-year-old son who stopped speaking entirely for 4 months. Mara had been the one to find her. Mara had been the one to call the ambulance. Mara had been the one standing in the hospital corridor at 3 in the morning with Christine's blood still on the sleeves of her jacket, while Ryder argued with a deputy who kept saying the words "ongoing investigation" like they meant something. Neither of them said Christine's name now. They didn't need to. Her name was in the air between every sentence, filling the silence where logic should have been. "We can't do it the same way," Mara said. "I know. And we can't do it your way either." "What's my way?" "The way where you ride up to a man's house alone with no plan and stand on his lawn staring at him like you're waiting for permission to break his jaw." Ryder's mouth twitched, not a smile, something closer to a flinch disguised as amusement. "I had a plan." "No, you didn't." "My plan was to not break his jaw." "That's not a plan. That's impulse control." He looked at her. She looked at him. For a half-second, the weight lifted. Not because anything was funny, but because they had been carrying this kind of weight for so long that sometimes the only option was to let the pressure escape sideways before it cracked something structural. Then the moment passed and the weight came back. "I'll call Janine Ford tonight," Mara said. "Crisis network. She might have a placement we can use that doesn't run through the county system. And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, Lena stays at the clubhouse tonight. I'll stay with her. We tell her we're having a sleepover and we make it feel normal." "Nothing about this is normal." "That's why we fake it. Because she's 10 and she deserves one night where someone fakes it well enough that she forgets." Ryder nodded. He started the bike. The engine shook the parking lot. Mara rolled up her window and followed him back to the clubhouse. Lena was exactly where he'd left her. Same chair, same backpack on the table, same position. Hands folded, eyes forward, shoulders pulled in. She hadn't moved. The coffee on the burner had gone cold. The building was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the wind testing the windows. When Mara walked in, something in Lena's posture changed. Not much, a fraction of an inch. Her shoulders dropped a degree. Her fingers loosened their grip on the backpack strap. She didn't smile, but she stopped bracing, stopped holding her body in the position of someone waiting for the next impact. Mara pulled a chair next to her and sat. "You hungry?" Lena shook her head. "You're eating anyway." Mara went behind the counter and heated soup on the single-burner stove they kept for late nights. Tomato soup from a can. She poured it into a ceramic mug because bowls felt too formal, and mugs felt like something you held when you needed warmth in your hands as much as your stomach. While Lena drank the soup, Ryder stepped outside and made a call he didn't want to make. The phone rang 3 times before a voice answered. Deep, slow, carrying the gravel of 40 years of cigarettes and the cadence of a man who measured his words the way a carpenter measures lumber. Once, twice, before cutting. You calling about the girl? Dutch Haney. 61 years old, founding member of the Iron Haven Riders. He hadn't held the president's patch in 6 years. That was Riders now. But Dutch was the foundation the clubhouse was built on. His voice was the one people listened to when the room got loud and the decisions got ugly. Word travels fast, Ryder said. Small clubhouse, small town. I heard she came in Saturday carrying a jar of coins. She came back today, alone. Something happened at her house. Silence on the line. Ryder could hear Dutch breathing. The wheeze of damaged lungs, a souvenir from a chemical exposure at the paper mill 20 years ago that the company never acknowledged, and the VA never connected to his service record, even though the exposure happened 3 months after his discharge. What are you doing about it? Dutch asked. Mara's working the crisis network. We're keeping the girl tonight. And the mother? Still in the house. Another silence, longer this time. The kind that carries the weight of a man who has seen this pattern before and knows how the math usually works out. You go near that house again? Ryder didn't answer. Ryder? I went to the house. I saw him. I left. You saw him. He came outside. We talked. You talked. Dutch's voice dropped lower. You stood on his property and let him see your face and your patches, and now he knows exactly who's watching. He already knew. The girl came to us. The girl is 10. She doesn't understand what she started. You do. And you went anyway. Dutch coughed. A deep, wet sound that lasted too long. You remember what happened to Christine Hale? The name again. Like a nail that couldn't be pulled out because it had been driven too deep. I remember. You remember how it started? You remember who made first contact? Who showed up at the boyfriend's job and asked questions? Who spooked him into thinking someone was building a case? Ryder closed his eyes. The parking lot was dark now. The neon sign buzzed above him. Iron Haven. The H&V stuttering in the cold. He could feel the temperature dropping, the air turning sharp against the scar on his face. That was different. That was identical, and you know it. I'm not going to let it happen again, Dutch. You said that last time. Same words, same voice, same look on your face, I imagine. And then you went solo and you pushed, and the man inside that house felt cornered, and he did what cornered men do. He went after the person he could reach. The words hit like a body shot. Ryder opened his eyes and stared at the sky. Gray-black, starless, the clouds low enough to feel like a ceiling pressing down. What do you want me to do? He asked. Nothing? I want you to do what you do worst. I want you to let other people handle it. I want you to stop seeing that boy's face every time a kid walks through our door. The line went quiet. The wind howled. Somewhere inside the clubhouse, Mara was sitting with a 10-year-old girl drinking tomato soup from a ceramic mug and pretending that everything was going to be fine. I'll call tomorrow, Ryder said. You call tonight. You call the full table. This goes in front of the club, not behind it. Dutch hung up. Ryder stood in the parking lot for a long time. His phone glowed in his hand, the screen showing the call duration. 4 minutes, 31 seconds. 4.5 minutes to have every crack in his leadership held up to the light. Dutch was right. He knew Dutch was right. The Christine Hale situation had gone wrong not because they did nothing but because Ryder had done something. The wrong something. At the wrong time. Driven by the engine that lived behind his ribs and ran on a fuel that had nothing to do with Christine Hale and everything to do with a 7-year-old boy in a red jacket in a photograph on a shelf. He went back inside. Mara had set up sleeping bags on the benches near the back wall, the long wooden benches that were usually covered in motorcycle parts and old magazines. She'd cleared them off and laid out 2 sleeping bags and a pillow from the office. Lena was already lying down, her backpack tucked against her chest like a shield, her eyes half closed. She wasn't asleep. She was performing sleep, the way children perform it when they know that closing their eyes is the only way to make the adults stop hovering. Mara stood near the counter. She looked at Ryder. Her face asked the question. Dutch wants a full table, he said quietly. Tonight. How many can you get? Enough. He sent the text at 8:47 p.m. group table, clubhouse. 10 p.m. Not optional. By 9:50, 5 riders had arrived. They came separately, headlights cutting through the dark parking lot one at a time, engines growling and then dying as they kicked their stands down and walked through the cold toward the door. Jace Reddick, 38, a welder with burns on both forearms and a custody battle that had cost him everything except the motorcycle and the patch. Tomas Vega, 51, a former Army medic who ran the clubhouse first aid station and never talked about the leg he'd lost below the knee in Fallujah. The prosthetic clicked against the concrete floor like a metronome. Pearl Addison, 44, the only woman besides Mara who held a full member patch, a diesel mechanic who'd done 18 months in county for aggravated assault on a man who had been following her sister. Coop Ellison, 29, the youngest member, a recovering addict with 60-pound kettlebell hands and a voice so quiet you had to lean forward to hear him. And Dutch. Dutch came last. He walked slowly, his breathing audible before he cleared the door, a wool coat hanging off shoulders that used to fill it completely. Mara had moved Lena to the back office, closed the door, put a blanket over her and left the desk lamp on. A warm circle of yellow light in a room full of cold corners. Lena didn't wake up, or she pretended not to. The riders sat around the largest table. No one spoke for the first 30 seconds. That was normal. At Iron Haven, silence before a table meeting was a form of respect, not ceremony, just the habit of men and women who had learned that the first person to talk usually said the least important thing. Dutch broke it. Tell them. Ryder told them. All of it. Lena and the coins, the jar on the counter, the grocery store meeting, Angie and the long sleeves, the open truck door, the open front door. Brent Mercer on the porch with his clean hands and his easy smile. When he finished, Jace leaned back in his chair and rubbed the burn scars on his left forearm. An unconscious gesture, something his hands did when his brain was processing information that his body already understood. What's the play? Jace asked. Mara's reaching out to the crisis network, Ryder said. Placement outside the county, somewhere Mercer can't find them. That takes time. I know. How much time does the woman have? Nobody answered. The question sat in the middle of the table like something alive. Pearl leaned forward. She had a toothpick between her teeth and she rolled it from one side of her mouth to the other before speaking. You went to his house, she said. Not a question. Yeah. Solo. Yeah. Without calling anyone. Yeah. Pearl pulled the toothpick out and pointed it at Ryder the way a teacher points a pen at a student who knows better. Christine Hale. Dutch already made that point. I'm making it again. Because you apparently need to hear it twice. Pearl put the toothpick back and crossed her arms. You showed him our patches. You let him see that someone's watching. Now he's going to get careful. Careful is worse than careless. Careless men leave evidence. Careful men leave nothing. Coop spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a murmur. She right. He knows now. He's going to lock it down. New locks, new rules, phone checks. She won't be able to breathe without him counting the seconds. Tomas tapped his prosthetic against the floor. Click, click, click. A rhythm that meant he was thinking. The system, Tomas said. What's the system doing? What it always does, Mara said from the doorway. She'd come back from checking on Lena. Family Services has a 7-month wait list. Sheriff's office won't move without a report. She hasn't filed a report. She won't file a report because the last time a woman in this county filed a report, the man posted bail before the paperwork dried. So we're it, Jay said. We're always it, Dutch said from the end of the table. His voice was low and raw, scraping against the air like a match head. That's not the question. The question is whether we're going to do it right this time or whether we're going to let Ryder's guilt drive the bus again. The room shifted. Every pair of eyes moved to Ryder. He felt it, the weight of their attention, The accumulated judgment of people who trusted him with the patch and the title, but not always with the decisions that came out of the dark place behind his ribs. My guilt, Ryder repeated. Your guilt, Dutch said. The boy. The picture on the shelf. The thing you don't talk about that runs everything you do when a kid walks through that door. Silence. Heavy. Structural. Ryder looked at the shelf, at the photograph. The dusty frame, the blonde hair and the gap-toothed grin and the red jacket. That's not what this is about. It's always what it's about, Dutch said. And until you say it out loud, it's going to keep making decisions for you. Bad ones. The kind that get people hurt. Mara stepped forward. Dutch, not now. When? When is it now? After the next woman ends up in the hospital? After the next kid stops talking for 4 months? The table went silent again. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Outside, the wind tested the door, pushing against the frame with a low moan that sounded almost human. Ryder stood. His chair scraped the concrete floor. He put both hands flat on the table and leaned forward, his weight on his palms, his scar catching the light in a way that made it look fresh, like something that hadn't healed, and maybe never would. His name was Caleb, Ryder said. His voice was steady. Barely. He was my son. He was 7 years old, and he lived with his mother in a house where the man she married after me used closet doors and belt buckles in silence. I knew. I knew for 2 months, and I did nothing because I was deployed, and the system said they were handling it. And I believed the system because believing it was easier than getting on a plane. By the time I got there, Caleb was gone. Pneumonia. The doctor said pneumonia. His body was too weak to fight it because he'd been fighting everything else for so long that there was nothing left. He stopped. The room didn't breathe. The fluorescent light flickered once and held. So yeah, it's always what it's about, every single time. And if that makes my judgment bad, then take the patch. But don't ask me to stand on a sidewalk and watch a truck with its door open and an open front door and know there's a woman inside and do nothing. Don't ask me to be the system. Nobody moved. Dutch looked at Ryder for a long time. His eyes were wet, but his face didn't change. He'd known. He'd always known, or guessed, or understood, in the way that old men understand the shape of damage even when they can't see the wound. But hearing it out loud, hearing the name Caleb spoken into the cold air of the clubhouse, was different from knowing. We're not asking you to do nothing, Dutch said finally. We're asking you to let us do it with you. Mara put her hand on the back of an empty chair and squeezed until her knuckles turned white. We vote, she said. Right now. Full protection protocol. Angie and Lena Cross. Coordinated. No solo moves. No confrontation without the table's authorization. We do this clean or we don't do it. One by one, they voted. Jace, Tomas, Pearl, Coop, Dutch, Mara. 6 hands raised. 6 voices saying the same word. In. Ryder looked at them. These broken, scarred, imperfect people sitting in a cold clubhouse under fluorescent lights, voting to protect a woman they'd never met because a 10-year-old girl had walked through the door with a jar of coins. He wanted to say something. He didn't. He just nodded. At 11:14 p.m., Mara's phone rang. She picked it up, listened for 20 seconds, and her face changed. Not dramatically. Mara's face didn't do dramatic. But the color left her cheeks in a way that was visible even under the bad lighting, and her hand moved to the edge of the table and gripped it. She hung up. That was Janine Ford, she said. The Crisis Network. And? She ran Brent Mercer through the system, standard background, employment, addresses, court records. And? Mara looked at Ryder, then at Dutch, then at the table. Brent Mercer had a wife before Angie, in Culver County, 4 years ago. Her name was Sharon Mercer. The room waited. Sharon Mercer filed a protective order in March 2022. It was granted. Brent violated it twice. The second violation, he showed up at her workplace with a hunting rifle in his truck. She dropped the charges under pressure from his family's attorney. 6 weeks later, Sharon Mercer disappeared. Pearl pulled the toothpick from her mouth. Disappeared how? Missing persons report filed by her sister. Never resolved. Case went cold. Sharon Mercer has not been seen or heard from in 3 years, 7 months, and 12 days. The wind outside screamed against the building. The neon sign buzzed. The The fluorescent light flickered again, and this time it didn't recover for 3 full seconds, plunging the room into a darkness that felt like a held breath. When the light came back, every face at the table wore the same expression. They weren't dealing with a man who hit. They were dealing with a man who erased. And right now, in a house on Ridgecrest Lane with the curtains drawn and the door locked and the headlights finally dead in the driveway, Angie Cross was alone with him. And she had no idea what he had done before her. The fluorescent light above the table still hadn't stopped flickering. Nobody moved to fix it. Nobody cared. The information Mara had just delivered sat in the room like a body, heavy, undeniable, changing the shape of everything around it. Sharon Mercer. Missing. 3 years, 7 months, 12 days. Ryder stood at the head of the table with both palms flat on the wood and his weight pitched forward like a man leaning into a wind that only he could feel. His mind was running calculations that had nothing to do with numbers. The distance between the clubhouse and Ridgecrest Lane, the thickness of the walls in that house, the hours between now and dawn, the number of breaths Angie Cross might have left if the man sleeping next to her woke up and decided tonight was the night the pattern completed itself. "Who else knows?" he asked. "Janine pulled it from public records," Mara said. "Court filings. The missing persons report is searchable if you know where to look. His family's attorney had half the records sealed, but the protective order violation is still accessible in Culver County's system." "The sheriff here, Crenshaw. Does he know Mercer's history?" "I don't know." "Find out." "Ryder. Find out if Dale Crenshaw ran a background check on the man living 3 blocks from the elementary school where his deputies direct traffic every morning. Find out if the sheriff of this county knows that Brent Mercer had a wife who vanished and did nothing about it." Mara held his gaze. She didn't argue. She pulled out her phone and stepped away from the table. Dutch coughed into his fist, the wet, grinding sound that came more often now, that lasted longer each time. When he spoke, his voice was stripped down to the studs, nothing decorative left. "This changes the math. I know it changes the math. Before tonight, we were dealing with a domestic situation, dangerous, ugly, but containable. Now, we're looking at something that might have a body attached to it." Pearl leaned forward. The toothpick was gone. Her hands were clasped on the table, the knuckles scarred from years of wrenching diesel engines and one night in a county holding cell that she never regretted. "If Sharon Mercer is dead," Pearl said, "and Brent Mercer is the reason, then Angie Cross isn't living with an abuser. She's living with a killer who hasn't been caught yet, and every day she stays in that house, the odds get worse." "We don't know Sharon's dead," Coop said quietly from his corner of the table. His hands were wrapped around a coffee mug he hadn't drunk from. "Missing isn't dead." "Missing for 3 years and 7 months is dead," Jace said. "You know it. I know it. Everyone at this table knows it." Coop looked down at his coffee. He didn't argue. He knew Jace was right. He just needed someone else to say it first, because saying it himself meant accepting a version of reality where a 10-year-old girl's mother was sleeping next to a man capable of making a woman disappear, and the only people standing between them and that outcome were 6 damaged bikers in a building with a broken jukebox and a neon sign that couldn't spell its own name. Tomas tapped his prosthetic against the floor. Click, click, click. The rhythm was faster now, the tempo of a man whose medic training was kicking in. Triage mode, sorting the living from the dying, deciding where to apply pressure first. "We need to move the timeline up," Tomas said. "Whatever Mara's working with the crisis network, placement, shelter, escape route, it needs to happen in days, not weeks." "Janine said she might have something in the northern part of the state," Mara said, returning to the table with her phone still in her hand. "A private shelter, not county funded. No paper trail through the local system, but she needs 72 hours to confirm availability." 72 hours, Ryder repeated. "Minimum. That's 3 nights. I can count, Ryder. 3 nights where Angie Cross sleeps in that house with a man who may have killed his last wife." The room absorbed this. The weight of it pressed down on the table, on the chairs, on the shoulders of every person in the room. 3 nights. 72 hours. 4,320 minutes. Each one a door that could open or close on a future that was no longer hypothetical. Ryder looked at the clock on the wall. 11:38 p.m. Lena was asleep in the back office, or pretending to be. The clubhouse smelled like tomato soup and stale coffee and the leather of 6 jackets draped over the backs of 6 chairs. Outside, the wind had died to a low moan that sounded like something mourning. "We watch the house," he said. "Round the clock. 2-person shifts. Nobody goes alone. Nobody makes contact. We watch and we wait. And the second Mara gets confirmation from the shelter, we move." "And if something happens before 72 hours?" Pearl asked. "Then we move before 72 hours. "Move how? We grab her? We break down the door? We become the thing the sheriff uses to bury us? We figure it out. That's not a plan. It's the plan we have." Pearl stared at him. Then she stood up, pulled her jacket off the chair, and shrugged into it. "I'll take first watch. Who's with me?" "I am," Tomas said. He stood, his prosthetic clicking against the floor as he crossed the room. At the door he paused and looked back at Ryder. "For what it's worth, I think Dutch is right about doing it together, but I also think you're right about one thing." "What's that?" 3 nights is too long." They left. The sound of 2 motorcycles starting in the parking lot cut through the walls. A low, shaking growl that vibrated the coffee mugs on the counter and rattled the loose pane in the window near the jukebox. Then the engines faded down the road toward Ridgecrest Lane, and the clubhouse was quiet again. Jace left next. Then Coop. Dutch was the last to go. He stood slowly, one hand on the table for balance, and walked to the door with the careful, measured steps of a man who knew his body was failing but refused to let anyone see the collapse happening in real time. At the door, he stopped. "You told them about Caleb," he said without turning around. "Yeah." "How does it feel?" Ryder stared at the empty table, the chairs pushed back at angles, the coffee rings on the wood, the fluorescent light still flickering overhead like a pulse that couldn't decide whether to keep going. "Like I pulled a bullet out with no anesthesia." Dutch nodded once. "Good. That means it was real." He opened the door. The cold rushed in. He stepped through it and was gone. Ryder locked the door behind him and stood in the empty clubhouse listening to the refrigerator hum and the building settle and his own breathing. Slow, heavy, the breathing of a man carrying a weight that had just doubled. He walked to the shelf behind the counter. He picked up the photograph of Caleb. He held it for 10 seconds, looking at the blonde hair and the gap-toothed grin and the red jacket that Caleb had insisted on wearing every day for 3 months because he said it made him look like a firefighter. Ryder had bought that jacket at a thrift store in Jacksonville during his second deployment's home rotation. $11. The zipper was broken, so they used a safety pin. Caleb didn't care. He wore it like armor. Ryder put the photograph back. He turned off the light above the counter and walked to the back office. He opened the door 2 inches and looked in. Lena was curled on the floor in the sleeping bag, her backpack pressed against her chest, the desk lamp casting a circle of warm light across her face. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was slow. But her hands, even in sleep, were gripping the backpack straps with a tension that children's hands shouldn't know. The white-knuckle grip of someone who had learned that everything could be taken away, and the only thing you could hold on to was what you carried with you. He closed the door. He sat in the chair behind the counter, and he didn't sleep. At 6:12 the next morning, Mara arrived with groceries. She let herself in with her key and found Ryder exactly where she expected, behind the counter, awake, his eyes carrying the flat, heavy look of a man who had spent the night inside his own head and come out worse than he went in. "Pearl and Tomas reported in at 4 a.m., Mara said, setting bags on the counter. "Eggs, bread, juice, the ordinary machinery of feeding people. No movement at the house. Lights went off at 11. Truck's still in the driveway. Both doors closed now." He closed the truck door. "Sometime in the night, yeah." "So he went outside. After I was there, after he saw my face, he went out to close the truck door he left open, which means he stood in his driveway in the middle of the night and looked at the street and thought about who might be watching." Mara didn't respond. She cracked eggs into a bowl and started whisking with a fork. The sound filled the silence, rhythmic, domestic, absurdly normal against the backdrop of what they both knew. "I ran something last night," Mara said after a while, after everyone left. "I couldn't sleep either, so I went through everything I could find online about the Culver County case." "And?" "Sharon Mercer's sister, the one who filed the missing persons report. Her name is Nina Beckett. She lives in Grandview, 45 minutes south. Ryder looked up. I think we need to talk to her, Mara said. Why? Because the official record tells us what happened on paper. Court filings, police reports, dates. But Nina Beckett can tell us what happened inside that house. She can tell us the pattern, how it started, how it escalated, what the warning signs were. And she can tell us something that the records can't. What's that? Mara stopped whisking. She held the fork still in the bowl and looked at Ryder. Whether her sister ever tried to leave, and what happened when she did. Ryder stared at her. Behind them, in the back office, they could hear Lena stirring. The rustle of the sleeping bag, the creak of the chair she'd pushed next to the desk for a nightstand. Small sounds. The sounds of a child waking up in a place that wasn't home and trying to remember where she was before she opened her eyes. Go, Ryder said. Take Coop. Don't take a bike. Take the truck. Don't wear patches. Mara nodded. She finished the eggs, plated them, and set a glass of juice on the counter for Lena. Then she was gone. Ryder fed Lena breakfast. She ate without talking. He didn't force conversation. They existed in the same space the way two people exist in a waiting room. Present, parallel, held together by circumstance rather than choice. After she finished, Lena asked one question. Is my mom okay? Ryder poured her more juice. He set the glass down and looked at her. We're making sure she is. That's not what I asked. He held her gaze. She was 10 years old and she could read evasion the way a radar reads aircraft. Distance, speed, trajectory. She knew when an answer was a deflection. She'd been raised on deflections. They were the native language of her household. I don't know, Ryder said, but I'm going to find out today. She accepted this because it was the truth, and she recognized truth the same way she recognized lies, by the weight of it, by the way it sat in a person's mouth, heavy and uncomfortable. Lies were smooth. Truth had edges. She went back to the office. She pulled her backpack onto the desk and took out a notebook, a school notebook, the kind with a marbled black and white cover, and began to draw. Ryder saw it from the doorway before he turned away. She was drawing a house with no windows. Mara and Coop reached Grandview at 9:40 a.m. Nina Beckett lived in a duplex on the east side of town, a street lined with sugar maples that had dropped their leaves months ago and wouldn't grow new ones until April. The yard was neat. A ceramic planter on the porch held dead flowers that nobody had removed. The mailbox had a dent in it that looked deliberate, the kind of dent made by a bat or a boot, not by weather. Nina opened the door on the second knock. She was 41, with Sharon's cheekbones and Sharon's eyes, but the resemblance ended at the surface. Where Sharon had been, according to the photographs Mara had found online, soft-faced and careful, Nina was angular and watchful. Her eyes went immediately to Coop, standing 2 steps behind Mara, his massive frame filling the porch like a wall. If you're selling something, I'm not buying. We're not selling, Mara said. We're from Harlan Falls. We need to talk to you about your sister. Nina's face didn't change, but something behind her eyes, some mechanism that had been running on automatic for 3 years, clicked into a different gear. Who are you? My name is Mara Quinn. This is Coop. We work with a community group that's trying to help a woman who's with Brent Mercer. The name hit Nina like a physical force. She took a half step backward. Her hand went to the door frame and gripped it, and for 3 seconds she stood there breathing through her nose with her jaw locked shut and her eyes fixed on a point somewhere past Mara's shoulder, a 1,000-yard stare, the kind Mara had seen on soldiers and survivors, and people who had been living inside a nightmare long enough to forget what the daylight looked like. Come in, Nina said. The house was clean and sparse. Minimal furniture, no photographs on the walls. A kitchen table with 3 chairs, one of which had a stack of file folders on the seat. Nina moved the folders to the counter. Mara caught a glimpse of a label on the top folder. Sharon, case file, handwritten in black marker, and gestured for them to sit. You said there's another woman, Nina said. She didn't sit. She stood against the counter with her arms crossed and her weight on her back foot, the posture of someone ready to leave a room quickly, even when it was her own. Angie Cross, Mara said. She has a 10-year-old daughter. They've been living with Brent for approximately 2 years. 2 years. Nina closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet, but her voice was steady. Sharon lasted 18 months. Can you tell us what happened? Nina looked at Coop. He sat at the table with his hands folded, completely still, making himself as small as a 240-pound man could make himself. He met her eyes and nodded once, a small gesture that said, "I'm here to listen," and nothing more. Nina started talking. The first 6 months were perfect. That was how it always began with Brent. A phase of warmth that was so consistent, so thorough, so meticulously performed that it didn't feel like performance. He cooked dinner. He remembered birthdays. He called Sharon beautiful and meant it in a way that filled every room. The neighbors loved him. Their friends loved him. Nina loved him. I told Sharon she'd found a good one, Nina said. Her voice was flat, drained of everything except the compulsion to keep speaking. I said that. To her face, I told my sister she was lucky. The shift came at month 7. Small things. A comment about Sharon's clothes. A suggestion that she didn't need to see her friends so often. A phone call that lasted too long, questioned with a tone that had an edge that wasn't there before. Each incident was small enough to dismiss, but the incidents accumulated the way snow accumulates, one flake at a time until the weight was unbearable and the thing beneath it was invisible. By month 12, Sharon had stopped calling Nina. When Nina called her, Sharon answered with a brightness that was manufactured, too quick, too high, too eager to convince. Nina recognized it because she'd spent 20 years hearing her sister's real voice, and this wasn't it. This was a recording playing over a scream. I drove down to see her, Nina said, unannounced. He answered the door, smiled, shook my hand, offered me coffee. Sharon came out of the bedroom wearing a turtleneck in July. In July. And she hugged me, and I felt her ribs, every single one of them, and she whispered in my ear so quiet I almost didn't catch it. Nina stopped. She stared at the kitchen floor. What did she say? Mara asked. She said, "Don't react." The kitchen was silent. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on the street. Coop's hands hadn't moved from their folded position on the table, but the tendons in his forearms were standing out like cables. Nina went to the counter and opened the folder. She pulled out a photograph and set it on the table in front of Mara. It was Sharon. The photo had been taken in a hospital, the blue curtain and fluorescent lighting unmistakable. Sharon's face was swollen on the left side, her eye closed completely, the skin a map of purple and yellow that spoke of impact and time. Her lip was split. Her neck had marks, finger-shaped marks, that wrapped around the right side like a signature. This was month 14, Nina said. She filed the protective order after this. He violated it twice. The second time, he showed up at the salon where she worked. He didn't go in. He sat in the parking lot with the engine running for 45 minutes. She could see him through the window. He just sat there, watching. The rifle, Mara said, in the truck bed, under a tarp. The police found it during the second violation arrest. He said he'd been at the range that morning. He had a receipt from the range. He'd gone to the range specifically to create a receipt so he'd have an explanation for why there was a rifle in his vehicle when he parked outside his estranged wife's workplace for 45 minutes. Mara's jaw was so tight she could feel her molars pressing together. She looked at Coop. His face was blank, but his eyes had gone somewhere else. Somewhere internal. Somewhere that the 60-pound kettlebells and the recovery meetings and the careful daily architecture of sobriety couldn't reach. She dropped the charges, Nina said. His family's attorney, a man named Garrett Foley. He didn't threaten her. He didn't have to. He just made it clear that the Mercer family had resources and patience, and that the legal process would be long and expensive and public, and that Sharon would have to relive every detail in a courtroom, while Brent's attorney cross-examined her about her mental health and her drinking and whether she'd provoked the incidents. Nina picked up the photograph and held it. She looked at her sister's broken face with an expression that had moved past grief into something colder, something geological, something that had been compressed and heated until it became a different substance entirely. She dropped the charges on a Thursday. She disappeared on a Saturday, 16 days later. Mara reached across the table, not to take the photograph. She put her hand flat on the table near Nina's elbow. Close enough to be present, not close enough to intrude. The same geometry Ryder had used with Lena. The geometry of people who understood that touch could be an invasion, even when it was meant as comfort. Nina, do you believe he killed her? Nina put the photograph back in the folder. She closed it. She pressed both hands flat on the cover and stared at the label. Sharon, case file. And when she spoke, her voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who had spent 3 years and 7 months living with a truth that no one in authority would confirm. I know he killed her. I know it the way I know my own name. But knowing isn't evidence. Knowing isn't a body. Knowing isn't a prosecutor willing to take the case. She looked at Mara. The detective who handled the missing persons case, a woman named Lucero out of Culver County. She told me off the record that she believed the same thing. She said she couldn't prove it. She said the case would stay open, but she couldn't make promises. That was 2 years ago. She transferred to another department 6 months later. Nobody picked up the file. Coop spoke for the first time since entering the house. His voice was so quiet that Nina leaned forward to hear it. The attorney, Garrett Foley. Is he still practicing? Nina's face changed. A flicker of something that might have been surprise or might have been the recognition that someone was asking the right question for the first time in 3 years. Garrett Foley, she said slowly, is Brent Mercer's cousin. The information landed in the room like a detonation with no sound. Mara's hand pressed harder against the table. Coop's folded hands tightened until the knuckles went bloodless. He's family, Nina continued. The Mercers have money. Old money. Manufacturing. The fabrication plant in Harlan Falls, the one where Brent works, is owned by his uncle, Ray Mercer. Garrett Foley married Ray's daughter. The attorney who pressured my sister into dropping charges is married into the family of the man who beat her. Mara stood up. She needed to move. She walked to the window and looked out at the street. The bare maples, the dead flowers, the dented mailbox. She thought about Angie Cross in a house on Ridgecrest Lane, sleeping next to a man whose family had the resources to make a protective order disappear and a wife along with it. There's something else, Nina said. Mara turned. After Sharon disappeared, I started looking into Brent's past. Before Sharon. Before Culver County. He lived in Franklin Ridge for 2 years. He had a girlfriend there, a woman named Delia Marsh. What happened to her? She moved, left town suddenly, no forwarding address. Her landlord told me she broke her lease and paid the penalty in cash and was gone within 48 hours. That was 5 years ago. Did you find her? No, but I found her mother in a nursing facility in Albany. She told me Delia called her once, about a month after she left Franklin Ridge. She said Delia was crying so hard she could barely speak. She said Delia told her she'd gotten away from someone and she was never going back. The mother asked who. Delia said a name. Brent. Brent. Nina reached into the folder again and pulled out a handwritten timeline on yellow legal paper. Dates, names, locations. Delia Marsh, Franklin Ridge, 5 years ago. Sharon Mercer, Culver County, 3 years ago. Angie Cross, Harlan Falls, now. 3 women. 3 towns. 1 man. Each town farther from the last. Each move a reset. Each new relationship a clean slate with no history visible to the next victim. He's not making mistakes, Nina said. He's getting better at it. Mara took the timeline. She photographed it with her phone. She photographed the case file. She photographed the hospital picture of Sharon and felt something in her chest compress. A physical sensation, a tightening that she recognized from her own years behind a closed door, her own nights counting the seconds between footsteps, her own morning mirror inventory of damage. At the door, Nina stopped them. The woman in Harlan Falls, Angie, does she have family? Just her daughter. Then she has no one. She has us. Nina looked at Mara for a long time. Her eyes held something complicated. Not hope, not skepticism, but the careful, guarded arithmetic of a woman who had learned that promises were the most dangerous form of currency. My sister had people too, Nina said. Friends, coworkers. A neighbor who said she'd call the police if she heard anything. None of them saved her. You know why? Mara waited. Because they all waited for permission. They waited for Sharon to ask for help. They waited for the right moment. They waited for evidence. They waited and waited and waited, and while they were waiting, he was planning. She closed the door. Mara and Coop sat in the truck for 4 minutes without starting the engine. Coop stared through the windshield at the dead flowers on the porch. Mara stared at the photographs on her phone. Sharon's face, the timeline, the case file label written in a sister's handwriting that had become its own kind of vigil. 3 women, Coop said, that we know of. 3 towns, that we know of. He's in Harlan Falls now, with Angie and a kid. Mara started the engine. The truck shuddered to life and the heater blew cold air that would take 10 minutes to warm. Call Ryder, she said. Coop dialed. Ryder picked up on the first ring. It's worse than we thought, Coop said. His quiet voice was quieter than usual, compressed, as though the words themselves were dangerous and needed to be handled carefully. There's a pattern. 3 women minimum. 1 missing, 1 fled, 1 still inside. Silence on the line. Then Ryder's voice, stripped of everything except the raw machinery of a man making a decision he couldn't unmake. How fast can you get back? 40 minutes. Make it 30. Pearl just called. Brent Mercer left the house 20 minutes ago. He didn't go to work. He drove to the county building. She followed him. County building? Why? She doesn't know yet. But Mara... The county building is where Dale Crenshaw's office is. Mara's foot pressed harder on the gas. The truck surged forward, the engine straining against the cold. If Mercer's talking to the sheriff, then he's not hiding. He's building. He's getting ahead of us. Ryder, if he knows we're watching, if he goes to Crenshaw and tells him a motorcycle club is harassing his family, then Crenshaw gives him a restraining order against the Iron Haven riders, and we can't get within 500 feet of that house. And Angie is locked inside a cage with legal walls, and a man who's done this before. The truck hit 60 on the county road. The bare trees blurred past the windows. The sky was the color of ash. There's more, Mara said. She told him about Nina, about Delia Marsh, about Garrett Foley, about the family money and the sealed records, and the pattern that stretched across 3 towns and 3 women and years of calculated destruction. When she finished, the line was quiet for so long that she thought the call had dropped. Ryder, I'm here. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that we have 72 hours to get Angie out, and now we might not even have that. I'm thinking that Brent Mercer is sitting in the sheriff's office right now turning us into the threat so nobody looks at him. And I'm thinking about something Dutch said last night. What? He said I need to let other people handle it. He was right. But he was talking about the club. I'm talking about something bigger. What do you mean? I mean the club can't solve this. 6 bikers watching a house can't stop a man with a family attorney and a sheriff who owes favors and a history of making women disappear. We're not enough. We were never enough. The truck crested a hill and Harlan Falls appeared below. A scatter of rooftops and bare trees and smoke rising from chimneys, everything gray, everything small, everything looking exactly like a town that kept its worst secrets behind closed doors and vinyl siding. So what do we do? Mara asked. Ryder's answer came in 4 words that changed the direction of everything. We go above him. Above Crenshaw? Above all of them. The sheriff, the attorney, the family, the county. We go federal. Mara gripped the steering wheel. The road curved and the town disappeared behind a tree line and then reappeared. Closer now, the details sharpening. The water tower, the steeple, the industrial park where the clubhouse sat with its broken neon sign. Federal means evidence. Federal means proof. Federal means a case that's airtight before we make a single move. I know. And while we're building a federal case, Angie is in that house. I know that too. So we're running 2 operations, one to build the case, one to keep her alive until the case is built. Yes, with 6 people. 7. Nina Beckett has a folder 3 inches thick. She's been building her own case for 3 years. She just didn't know who to give it to. Mara pulled into the clubhouse parking lot. The neon sign buzzed overhead. The H and V flickered their half-word into the midday gray. She killed the engine and sat in the silence and felt the weight of what they were about to attempt settle onto her shoulders like a yoke made of iron and obligation and the memory of every woman she'd ever been who hadn't been saved in time. She looked at Coop. "You ready for this?" Coop stared at the clubhouse door. Behind it, somewhere inside, a 10-year-old girl was drawing houses with no windows, while a scarred ex-Marine who hadn't slept in 36 hours stood guard over a jar of coins that no one had counted and no one ever would. "No," Coop said, "but I don't think ready is the point." They opened their doors. The cold hit them like a wall. They walked toward the clubhouse, boots crunching on frozen gravel, and as they reached the entrance, Mara's phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from Pearl. 2 sentences. Mercer left sheriff's office. He filed a complaint against Iron Haven riders for harassment and stalking. Mara showed the screen to Coop. His face didn't change, but his hand found the door frame and gripped it hard enough that the wood groaned. They stepped inside. Ryder was behind the counter. Lena was in the back office. The photograph of Caleb sat on its shelf. The jar of coins caught the fluorescent light. Mara set her phone on the counter, screen up. Ryder read Pearl's message. He read it twice. Then he looked up, and his face held the expression of a man who had just watched every door in the room lock simultaneously from the outside. They had gone from protectors to suspects in the time it took Brent Mercer to walk into a sheriff's office and smile. And somewhere on Ridgecrest Lane, behind curtains that never opened and a door that only locked from inside, Angie Cross had just become more unreachable than she had been at any point since her daughter walked into this clubhouse, carrying a jar full of coins and a question that no 10-year-old should ever have to ask. The complaint landed on Dale Crenshaw's desk at 11:22 a.m. And by noon, the entire architecture of the Iron Haven Riders protection operation had been turned inside out like a jacket in a storm. Ryder stood behind the counter reading Pearl's text for the 3rd time, while the implications multiplied in his head like cracks spreading across ice. Harassment and stalking. 2 words that transformed 6 wounded bikers watching a house into a criminal threat. 2 words that gave Brent Mercer a shield made of the same legal system that had failed every woman he'd ever touched. "He's smart," Mara said. She was standing at the window watching the parking lot as though Mercer himself might pull in at any moment. "He's been smart this whole time. We just didn't know how smart." "He's not smart," Ryder said. "He's practiced. There's a difference. Doesn't matter what we call it. The result is the same. If Crenshaw acts on that complaint, we get a cease and desist or worse. We can't go near the house. We can't go near Angie. We can't go near Lena's school. We become the story instead of him." Ryder's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Dale Crenshaw. He let it ring 3 times. Then he picked up. "Ryder." Crenshaw's voice was the practiced neutral of a man who spent his career standing in the exact center of every conflict so he could claim he wasn't on either side. "I need you to come in." "Come in where?" "My office, today." "What for?" "I think you know what for. Brent Mercer was here this morning. He says your people have been parked outside his house. He says one of your members confronted him on his own property. He's scared, Ryder." His words. Ryder looked at Mara. She was close enough to hear. Her jaw was set so tight the muscles in her neck stood out like wire. "He's scared," Ryder repeated. "Those are his words. I'm asking you to come in and we can sort this out before it becomes something neither of us wants." Dale. "Did you run a background check on Brent Mercer when he moved to Harlan Falls?" Silence on the line. Not the silence of confusion, the silence of a man recalculating. "What does that have to do with—" "Did you run one?" "We don't run background checks on residents, Ryder. That's not how—" "Culver County. Look up Culver County. Sharon Mercer. Missing persons. 3 years, 7 months. Then call me back and tell me who's scared." He hung up. The phone sat in his hand like a grenade with the pin pulled. He'd just given Crenshaw a direction, but he'd also shown his cards, told the sheriff exactly how much the Iron Haven Riders knew and exactly how deep they'd been digging. "You just tipped our hand," Mara said. "I know." "If Crenshaw calls Mercer, he won't. Crenshaw's a coward, not a collaborator. He'll look it up. He'll find what we found. And then he'll sit in his office for 3 hours trying to figure out how to make this go away without it touching him. And if you're wrong—" Ryder didn't answer. He walked to the back office and opened the door. Lena was sitting at the desk drawing in her notebook. The house with no windows had grown. More houses now, a row of them, each one sealed shut, no doors, no openings of any kind. Above the houses she'd drawn a sky filled with birds. The birds were the only things that were free. "Lena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." She looked up. Her eyes were too old for her face. "Does Brent have guns in the house?" The pencil stopped. "Lena, there's one in the bedroom closet, on the top shelf, behind the shoebox with his work boots." "What kind?" "Long, with a brown part where you hold it. A rifle. Same as Culver County. Same weapon. Same hiding spot. Same man carrying the same toolkit from town to town. Is there anything else? Anything he hides? Anything you've seen that your mom doesn't know about?" Lena put the pencil down. She folded her hands on the notebook covering the windowless houses and the birds, and she looked at Ryder with an expression that was so carefully constructed, so precisely maintained, that it could only belong to a child who had spent years learning to manage the adults around her instead of the other way around. "He has a phone," she said. "Not his regular phone. A different one, small, silver. He keeps it in his truck, in the space under the back seat. I saw him take it out once when Mom was inside. He was talking to someone and his voice was different." "Different how?" "Quiet, like when you don't want someone to hear you but you're also mad. Like controlled mad." Ryder crouched so his eyes were level with hers. "You did good. You understand that? Everything you're telling me, you did good." She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She picked up the pencil and went back to drawing. But her hand was shaking now. A fine tremor that traveled from her fingers through the pencil to the paper, making the lines of the bird's wings vibrate as though they were actually beating. Ryder closed the office door and walked back to Mara. "Second phone. Burner, under the back seat of his truck." Mara's eyes narrowed. "That's how he stays clean. Anything incriminating goes through the burner. If anyone checks his primary phone, it's spotless. We need that phone. We can't touch his truck, not now, not with a complaint filed." "We can't, but someone can." They looked at each other. The same thought arrived in both their minds at the same time, carried by the same current of desperation and diminishing options. "Nina Beckett," Mara said. "She's not connected to us. She's not named in any complaint. She's a private citizen looking into her sister's disappearance, if she happens to be in Harlan Falls. If she happens to see Brent Mercer's truck parked somewhere public. If something falls out of that truck and she picks it up, that's thin. Everything we have is thin, but Nina has been building a case for 3 years and nobody listened. She'll do it." Mara called Nina. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. When she hung up, her face carried something new. Not hope, not certainty, but the grim determination of a woman who had just added another soldier to a war that was being fought in the spaces between the law. "She's coming. She'll be here by evening." "Good. Now we need the federal contact." Mara pulled up her phone and scrolled through a contact list that Ryder had never seen. A list she kept separate, maintained quietly, populated by the connections she'd built during her own escape years ago. Social workers, advocates, lawyers who worked pro bono, and one name that she'd never used because using it meant admitting that the local system had failed completely and the only option left was to go over everyone's head. Agent Rita Salcido, FBI, Domestic Violence Task Force. She'd gotten the name from a woman at a shelter in Pennsylvania 3 years ago. A woman who'd said, "If you ever need someone who actually gives a damn and has subpoena power, call Rita Salcido." Mara had written the number on a piece of paper and folded it into her wallet and carried it like a talisman, something you kept for the worst day, the day when everything else had been tried and failed and the only move left was the one that couldn't be taken back. Today was that day. She dialed. It rang 4 times. A voice answered, clipped, professional, the voice of someone accustomed to receiving phone calls that contained the worst information human beings were capable of producing. Salcedo. "My name is Mara Quinn. I'm calling from Harlan Falls. I have a situation involving a man named Brent Mercer, who I believe has a history of severe domestic violence across multiple jurisdictions, a missing former wife in Culver County, and a current victim who is trapped in his home with her 10-year-old daughter. The local sheriff has been made aware and has not acted. The subject has filed a legal complaint to prevent community intervention. I have documentation, witness testimony, and a pattern that spans at least 3 women in 3 towns over 5 years. Silence on the line. Then the sound of a chair creaking and a pen clicking. The reflex of an agent shifting from passive to active. How did you get this number? From someone who trusted you. And you are? A survivor. A member of a motorcycle club called the Iron Haven Riders, and the only person standing between Angie Cross and a man who has done this before and will do it again. Another pause, shorter this time. Tell me everything. From the beginning, don't skip anything. Mara talked for 23 minutes. She gave Salcedo every piece. Lena and the coins, the Saturday breakfast, Angie in the grocery store, the open truck door, Nina Beckett's case file, Delia Marsh and Franklin Ridge, the protective order violations, the disappearance of Sharon Mercer, the family attorney Garrett Foley, the fabrication plant owned by Ray Mercer, the complaint filed with Crenshaw, the second phone hidden under the truck seat. She laid it out the way Tomas laid out medical supplies, organized, sequential, nothing wasted. When she finished, Salcedo was quiet for 10 seconds. The missing persons case in Culver County. You said the detective's name was Lucero? Elena Lucero. She transferred out. The case went cold. I know Elena Lucero. She transferred to the State Bureau. She didn't drop that case. She was pulled off it. There's a difference. I'm going to make some calls. I need you to do 3 things. Name them. 1. Do not approach the subject's residence. Do not have any member of your organization within visual range of his property. He filed a complaint, and that gives him a paper trail. If anything happens near that house while there's an active complaint, he uses it. Understood. 2. Get me the documentation from Nina Beckett. Everything she has. Photographs, court records, the timeline. I need it digitally, tonight. Done. 3. Bob. The current victim. Angie Cross. Someone needs to make contact, not your people. Someone clean. Someone he's never seen. Someone who can give her a phone number and a window of time and nothing else. Can you do that? Mara thought about it. Not a club member. Not anyone connected to Iron Haven. Someone invisible. I know someone, she said. Who? Deborah, the intake worker at Family Services. She's overworked and underfunded, and she knows exactly what's happening in that house because she's seen the pattern 400 times. She just never had anyone to hand the case to. Can you trust her? She cried when I told her the shelter wait list was 7 months. Yes, I can trust her. Then move. Tonight. I'll have a preliminary assessment by morning. If this pattern holds, and from what you're telling me it will, I can open an interstate investigation within 48 hours. But Mara, listen to me. 48 hours is the best case timeline. In those 48 hours, Brent Mercer needs to believe that nothing has changed. He needs to believe that his complaint worked. He needs to believe he's in control. The moment he senses the ground shifting, the moment he feels the cage closing, he will act. And his action will not be against you or your club. It will be against the person he can reach. Angie, keep her alive until I can get there. Salcedo hung up. Mara lowered the phone and stood in the clubhouse under the flickering fluorescent light and felt the weight of the next 48 hours settle into her bones like lead. Keep her alive. 3 words. The simplest instruction in the world and the hardest to execute when the woman you're trying to keep alive was sleeping next to the danger every night and didn't fully understand what she was sleeping next to. The afternoon moved in a blur of phone calls and logistics and the grinding, mechanical work of building an operation with no margin for error. Nina Beckett arrived at 5:30 p.m. in a sedan with a folder of documents on the passenger seat and a face that carried the terrifying calm of a woman who had been waiting 3 years for someone to take her seriously. She sat at the table and spread the contents of the folder across the surface. Photographs, timesheets, receipts, phone records she'd obtained through her own research, a map of Culver County with locations marked in red, and the handwritten timeline on yellow legal paper that tracked Brent Mercer's movements across towns and women like a predator's migration pattern. Mara scanned everything, sent it to Salcedo, organized the physical documents into categories, evidence of abuse, evidence of the protective order violations, evidence of family interference through Garrett Foley, and the thin, haunting file labeled simply Sharon, last known. While Mara worked, Ryder made the call to Deborah. It took convincing. Deborah was a county employee. What Ryder was asking her to do, make an unofficial contact with a domestic violence victim outside the intake process, provide a phone number that bypassed the county system, create a pathway to an escape that had no paper trail through her office, could cost her the job she'd held for 11 years. The job that paid her mortgage and her daughter's community college tuition and the car payment on the only reliable vehicle she owned. "I'm not asking you to risk your career," Ryder said. "I'm asking you to save a woman's life." Those might be the same thing. They might, but Deborah, you sat behind that desk and told Mara the wait list was 7 months. You knew what that meant. You knew what 7 months looks like inside a house where the closet is the safest room. Silence on the phone. Then a long exhale. The sound of a woman releasing the last resistance between what she was allowed to do and what she knew was right. "Tell me what you need." "Tomorrow morning." Angie drops Lena at school at 8:15. She goes to the shop and save by 8:40. Aisle 7. She's alone. Brent is at the plant by 7. You meet her. You give her a phone, a prepaid phone with one number programmed in, Mara's. You tell her that when she's ready, she calls that number and someone will come. That's all. You don't explain. You don't convince. You don't push. You give her the phone, and you leave. And if she doesn't take it, she'll take it. How do you know? Because her daughter walked 3 blocks in the rain carrying a jar of coins to ask a stranger for help. Lena didn't get that courage from nowhere. It came from the part of Angie that's been waiting for a door to open. You're the door, Deborah. You just have to stand there and be open. The call ended at 7:14 p.m. Outside, darkness had swallowed the parking lot. The temperature had dropped to 19 degrees. The neon sign buzzed its broken name into the night. Inside, the clubhouse was warm with the body heat of people working toward something that felt larger than any of them. Nina sat with Lena in the back office. Ryder hadn't planned it. Nina had simply walked past the open door, seen the girl drawing houses with no windows, and sat down without asking. They didn't talk for the first 10 minutes. Nina just sat and watched Lena draw. Then Nina picked up a pencil and, on a separate piece of paper, drew a door. A simple door with a handle. She slid it across the desk to Lena. Lena looked at it, looked at Nina, and then, without a word, erased one wall of the nearest house and drew a door in its place. It was such a small gesture, pencil on paper, graphite rearranging on a cheap notebook page. But Ryder, standing in the doorway where neither of them could see him, felt something crack inside his chest. Something that had been frozen for years, sealed behind the same kind of wall that Lena drew around her houses. He turned away before the crack reached his face. At 9 p.m., the full table convened again. 7 riders plus Nina. The energy in the room was different from the night before, tighter, more focused, carrying the electric tension of people who understood that the next 24 hours were a razor's edge, and the fall on either side was permanent. Ryder laid it out. The federal contact, Salcedo's 48-hour timeline, Deborah's assignment at the shop and save, the burner phone under Mercer's truck seat, Nina's documentation en route to the FBI, the complaint against Iron Haven that meant no club member could go near Ridgecrest Lane. "So we're grounded," Jace said. His jaw was tight, the burn scars on his arms red under the light. "From the house, yes, but not from everything else. What else is there?" "The phone, the burner. Nina's going to get it." Every head turned to Nina. She sat at the end of the table, straight-backed, her hands folded in front of her, and met their eyes one by one with the unflinching steadiness of a woman who had been living inside this fight longer than any of them. "How?" Pearl asked. "Brent parks his truck at the fabrication plant during his shift," Nina said. "The lot isn't gated. Employee vehicles are unattended from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. I go in during the morning shift. I'm not a member of this club. I'm not named in any complaint. I'm a woman visiting a fabrication plant. Maybe I'm looking for a job. Maybe I'm dropping off a lunch for someone. I walk through the lot. I find his truck. The phone is under the back seat. And if it's locked?" Lena said he leaves the windows cracked, even in winter. He smokes in the truck and doesn't want the smell building up. Dutch leaned forward. His breathing was heavy, the wheeze louder tonight, the pauses between sentences longer. If you get caught, you're trespassing, theft, breaking into a vehicle. I won't get caught. You don't know that. I've been invisible for 3 years. Invisible to the police. Invisible to the courts. Invisible to every person and institution that should have found my sister and didn't. Being invisible is the only skill I've developed. I might as well use it. The room held its breath. Dutch looked at Ryder. Ryder looked at Mara. The chain of glances traveled the table like a current. Vote, Ryder said. 6 hands, unanimous. Nina nodded once. She didn't thank them. She didn't need to. Gratitude wasn't the currency being exchanged. This was something older. An agreement between people who had nothing left to trade except their willingness to stand in the dark and do what the daylight refused to do. The meeting broke at 10 p.m. Riders left in pairs. Nina stayed. She would sleep on the bench in the clubhouse, the same bench where Lena had slept the night before. Mara stayed too. Ryder stayed. The building settled into the cold, the walls contracting, the pipes ticking, the neon sign outside buzzing its half-word into the January nothing. At 11:40 p.m., Ryder's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Crenshaw. I looked up Culver County. We need to talk. My office, 7 a.m. Ryder stared at the message. Then he typed back, I'll be there. He put the phone down and looked at the dark window. His reflection stared back, the scar, the stubble, the eyes that hadn't closed in 2 days. Behind the reflection, the parking lot. Beyond the parking lot, the road. Beyond the road, a town full of people sleeping in houses that may or may not have been safe, trusting locks that may or may not have held, believing in a system that may or may not have been watching. He turned away from the window and sat in the chair behind the counter and watched the clock move toward morning. At 6:45 a.m., Ryder rode to the county building. The Harley's engine echoed off the empty storefronts of Main Street, a sound like a heartbeat amplified, filling the cold morning air with the vibration of something alive and angry. He parked at the curb and walked inside. His boots left wet prints on the linoleum. The building smelled like old paper and floor wax and the staleness of bureaucracy running on fumes. Crenshaw's office was at the end of the hall. The door was open. The sheriff sat behind his desk with a coffee cup and a laptop and a face that had aged 5 years overnight. Close the door, Crenshaw said. Ryder closed it. He didn't sit. He stood with his back against the wall and his arms crossed and waited. Sharon Mercer, Crenshaw said. Missing, Culver County, protective order violations, the whole thing. Yeah. Why didn't you come to me first? Because the last time I came to you, Christine Hale ended up in the ICU. Crenshaw flinched. It was small, a tightening around the eyes, a shift in the shoulders. But Ryder caught it the way a sniper catches movement. The sheriff knew. He knew he'd failed Christine Hale. He knew the system he represented had ground to a halt, while a woman's bones broke in a house 3 miles from his office. That was different. It's never different, Dale. It's the same. Every time. The same pattern. The same excuses. The same waiting. The only thing that changes is the name. Crenshaw leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. Mercer's complaint against your club. It's on my desk. I know. If I file it, your people can't go near him. I know. If I don't file it and something happens, he uses it to claim I'm protecting a motorcycle gang over a law-abiding citizen. Is that what you think he is? Law-abiding? Crenshaw lowered his hands. His eyes were red. He looked like a man standing in a doorway trying to decide which room was on fire. I looked at the Culver County file, the missing persons report, the protective order. I called their department this morning, talked to a sergeant who remembered the case. He said the detective, Lucero, was convinced Mercer was involved. She couldn't prove it. She was pulled off and reassigned. Pulled off by who? Crenshaw hesitated. His tongue moved across his lower lip, a stalling gesture, a man buying seconds. The request came from the county prosecutor's office. The prosecutor in Culver County at the time was a man named David Foley. The name detonated silently in the room. Foley, Ryder said. Garrett Foley's brother. David Foley was the county prosecutor who shut down the investigation into Sharon Mercer's disappearance. Garrett Foley was the family attorney who pressured Sharon into dropping the protective order charges. They're brothers, and they're both connected to the Mercer family through marriage and business. Ryder pushed off the wall. He took one step toward the desk and stopped. His fists were clenched at his sides, and every tendon in his forearms was standing out like bridge cable. Two brothers. One pressured the victim, one killed the investigation, and the man in the middle walked free and moved to a new town and started over with a new woman. That's what it looks like. That's what it is. Crenshaw stood. He walked to the window and looked out at Main Street, the empty sidewalks, the closed stores, the morning light hitting the pavement with the weak gray indifference of a January sun that couldn't warm anything. I'm not going to file Mercer's complaint, he said. Ryder waited. But I can't move on him either, not without evidence, not without a case, not without something that connects him to Sharon Mercer's disappearance beyond speculation and a pattern. Well, the FBI is involved, Ryder said. Agent named Salcedo. Domestic Violence Task Force. She's opening an investigation. Crenshaw turned from the window. His face carried the complicated expression of a man who was simultaneously relieved that someone with more authority was taking over and ashamed that he needed them to. How long? 48 hours, maybe less. In the meantime, I need you to do one thing. What? Nothing. Don't call Mercer. Don't contact his attorney. Don't file anything. Don't move. Just stand still and let us work. I could lose my job for sitting on a complaint. You could lose a woman's life for acting on one. The words filled the office. Crenshaw stared at Ryder. Ryder stared back. Two men standing on opposite sides of a line that separated the law from justice, and for the first time in Ryder's memory, the sheriff was considering the possibility that the two weren't the same thing. 48 hours, Crenshaw said. 48 hours. Ryder left. He rode back to the clubhouse and the engine roared through the empty streets, and the cold tore at his face, and he didn't feel any of it because every nerve in his body was focused on the clock that had started running the moment he walked out of that office. At 8:22 a.m., Deborah walked into the shop and Save on Route 9. She carried a grocery basket and moved through the aisles with the unremarkable pace of a woman doing morning shopping. Aisle 3, Aisle 5, Aisle 7. Angie Cross was there, reaching for a can on the second shelf. Long sleeves. Hair pulled back, eyes scanning. The choreography of a woman who had memorized every exit in every room she entered. Deborah stopped beside her. She didn't look at her. She reached for a can on the same shelf and spoke without turning her head. There's a phone in your cart, under the bread. One number programmed in. When you're ready, call it. Someone will come. Angie's hand froze on the shelf. Her breathing changed, shallow, rapid, the breathing of a prey animal that has detected a sound it can't identify as threat or rescue. "Who are you?" Angie whispered. "Someone who sees you." Deborah set her can in her basket and walked away. She didn't look back. She moved through the checkout and out the door and across the parking lot and got in her car and drove 2 blocks before she pulled over and pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and breathed and breathed and breathed. Inside the store, Angie Cross stood in aisle 7, her hand still on the shelf, her heart hammering against ribs that had learned to absorb impact. She looked down at her cart. The bread sat on top of everything else. Underneath it, she could see the edge of something small and black. A phone. She covered it with a box of cereal. She pushed the cart to the checkout. She paid. She loaded the bags into the car. She drove home. She pulled into the driveway and sat with the engine running and looked at the house. The vinyl siding, the chain-link fence, Lena's bicycle with the training wheel still attached, the curtains that never opened. She reached under the bread. She took the phone. She slipped it into her sock, pulled her jeans down over it, and walked inside. At 8:47 a.m., Nina Beckett pulled into the parking lot of the Mercer fabrication plant in a rented sedan. She wore a plain coat and carried a clipboard, the universal disguise of someone who looked like they belonged. She walked through the employee lot with the unhurried confidence of a woman checking vehicle inspection stickers or reading license plates for an insurance survey. No one questioned her. No one looked twice. She found Brent's truck in row 3, a dark blue pickup with a Mercer fabrication decal on the rear window. The driver's side window was cracked 1 inch, just as Lena had said. She looked around. The lot was empty. The plant hummed behind its concrete walls, the sound of machinery grinding through another shift. Nina reached through the gap in the window. She couldn't reach the back seat. She tried the door handle. Locked. She circled to the passenger side. That window was cracked too. Wider. Nearly 2 inches. She reached in, her arm stretched to its limit, and felt under the back seat. Her fingers touched carpet. Dust. A wrapper from something. Then something hard, rectangular, cold. She pulled it out through the window gap. A silver flip phone, prepaid. No brand marking. The kind you buy at a gas station counter and throw away when you're done. Her hands shook. She opened it. The screen lit up. Low battery, 2 bars of signal. She navigated to the call log. Numbers. Dozens of them. Calls to the same 3 numbers over and over, spanning months. She photographed every screen, call history, sent messages, received messages. She photographed it all with the methodical precision of a woman who had been waiting 3 years for a single piece of evidence that proved she wasn't crazy, that her sister hadn't just left, that the man the world called normal was anything but. One text message stopped her cold. Sent to an unsaved number, dated 2 weeks ago, 4 words. Same problem as before. Below it, a reply from the same unsaved number. Handled last time. Will handle again. Don't text this number anymore. Nina stared at the screen. Same problem as before. Handled last time. The words were vague enough to mean nothing in isolation and specific enough to mean everything in context. Same problem. A woman pushing back. Handled. The euphemism that replaced whatever had happened to Sharon Mercer on a Saturday in Culver County 3 years, 7 months, and 12 days ago. She closed the phone, put it in her coat pocket, walked back to her car, got in, started the engine, drove out of the lot at the speed limit, checking her mirrors every 3 seconds until the fabrication plant disappeared behind her. She called Mara from the highway. I have it. And Mara, there are messages on this phone. Messages that connect him to someone else. Someone who helped him before. Mara's voice came back tight and controlled. Get here. Now. Don't stop for anything. Nina drove. The highway stretched ahead, gray and straight and leading back to Harlan Falls, where everything was converging. The FBI, the sheriff, the club, the evidence, the women, the child, the jar of coins, the photograph of a boy in a red jacket. All of it accelerating toward a point that none of them could see yet, but all of them could feel. At 9:15 a.m., inside the house on Ridgecrest Lane, Angie Cross stood in the bathroom with the door locked and the water running. She pulled the phone from her sock. She held it in both hands. She stared at the screen, the single contact, no name, just a number. Her thumbs hovered over the keys. Behind the bathroom door, she could hear the house breathing. The creak of settling walls, the tick of the kitchen clock, the absence of another person that was somehow louder than their presence. Brent was at work. He would be there until 4. She had 6 hours and 45 minutes of silence. She pressed the call button. It rang twice. A woman's voice answered, calm, steady. The voice of someone who had been waiting for this exact call. This is Mara. I don't know who you are, Angie said. Her voice was barely a whisper, pushed out between clenched teeth, each word a small act of defiance against years of silence. But someone put a phone in my grocery cart and told me to call when I was ready. Are you ready? The question was enormous. It contained everything, every bruise of every lie, every night in the closet, every morning pretending, every smile at the neighbors, every long sleeve in summer, every flinch at a footstep, every calculation of risk and cost and survival that had filled every minute of every day for 2 years. I don't know, Angie whispered, but my daughter walked to a building full of strangers and asked them to save me with a jar of coins. And if she's brave enough to do that, then I have to be brave enough to do this. Then listen to me. Don't pack a bag. Don't change your routine. Don't do anything different. Tomorrow night, Thursday, Leave the back door unlocked at 11 p.m. Take Lena. Walk to the end of the alley behind your house. Someone will be there. Who? People who won't let anything happen to you. Angie closed her eyes. The water ran in the sink. The house breathed around her. How do I know I can trust you? You don't, but your daughter did, and she was right. The call ended. Angie pressed the phone against her forehead. Then she took the battery out, wrapped the phone in a washcloth, and put it behind the cleaning supplies under the sink, where Brent never looked because cleaning was beneath him. She turned off the water. She opened the bathroom door. She walked into the kitchen and started making lunch for a man who would come home at 4 o'clock and sit at the table and eat the food she made and look at her with eyes that saw a possession, not a person. 26 hours. She had to survive 26 more hours of ordinary. And she had no idea that at that exact moment, 6 blocks away in a clubhouse with a broken neon sign, a woman named Nina Beckett was laying a silver flip phone on a table in front of a scarred ex-Marine who was reading a text message that proved Brent Mercer had not acted alone. That somewhere in the dark machinery of a family with money and lawyers and the ability to make women disappear, there was a second pair of hands. And those hands already knew that something in Harlan Falls had changed. The silver flip phone sat on the table between them like a confession waiting to be read. Nina stood on one side, Ryder on the other. Mara leaned against the counter with her arms crossed and her eyes fixed on the phone's cracked screen as though it might disappear if she looked away. The text messages glowed in the dim light of the clubhouse. Same problem as before and handled last time. Will handle again. 4 sentences that turned a domestic violence case into something with the weight of a conspiracy and the shape of a grave. Mara photographed every message on the phone, every call log entry, every number. She sent it all to Agent Salcedo in a single encrypted email at 9:47 a.m. and then stood in the kitchen doorway with her phone pressed against her thigh and waited. The reply came in 11 minutes. Phone is critical evidence. Do not return it. Do not discuss with local law enforcement. I'm moving up the timeline. Expect contact by evening. Salcedo. Ryder read the message over Mara's shoulder. His face didn't change. His body didn't shift. But something behind his eyes, something that had been running at full speed since Lena walked through the door carrying a jar of coins, downshifted by 1 gear. Not relief. Not even close. Just the faintest recalibration of a man who had been operating on the assumption that he was alone and was beginning to accept that he might not be. She's moving up, Mara said. I see that. If she can get a warrant based on the phone records, she can pull the numbers, find out who's on the other end of those messages. Garrett Foley, Ryder said. Or David, one of the brothers. Probably, but probably isn't enough. Salcedo needs the records to prove it. Nina sat at the table. She hadn't spoken since laying the phone down. Her hands were flat on the wood, fingers spread, as though she were trying to absorb the surface of the table into her palms. 3 years, 7 months, 12 days of waiting. 3 years of being told there wasn't enough evidence. 3 years of carrying a folder that nobody wanted to open. And now a silver flip phone with 4 sentences that might finally break the silence that had swallowed her sister. Nina, Mara said. Nina looked up. Her eyes were dry, but her face held the particular stillness of a person who is holding everything together by choosing not to feel any of it until the work is done. Thank you. Nina shook her head. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when Angie's out. Thank me when he's in handcuffs. Thank me when somebody finds my sister. The last sentence landed differently. Finds my sister. Not present tense optimism, not denial. Just the dogged, exhausted insistence of a woman who needed her sister to be found, in whatever form, in whatever state, because the not knowing was its own kind of violence that had been going on for longer than the bruises ever lasted. The hours crawled. The clubhouse became a command center, Mara coordinating with Salcedo, Ryder managing the riders, Nina organizing her documentation into a federal-ready package. Lena stayed in the back office. She had stopped drawing houses. She was drawing motorcycles now, a row of them, lined up outside a building with a sign on it that she'd written in careful block letters. Safe. At 4:18 p.m., Ryder's phone rang. Agent Salcedo. We have the warrant, Salcedo said. Phone records from the burner. The numbers trace back to a prepaid account purchased in Culver County. The purchase was made with a credit card belonging to Garrett Foley. Ryder closed his eyes. There it was. The bridge between the phone in the clubhouse and the attorney who had pressured Sharon Mercer into silence. The same man married into the family. The same man who had wielded the law like a weapon to protect the man who wielded his fists. I've contacted the Culver County DA's office. New DA. Took over 18 months ago. He's cooperating. Elena Lucero is being brought back onto the Sharon Mercer case as a consultant. We're building a multi-jurisdictional task force. Mercer, Garrett Foley, and potentially David Foley are all subjects. How long until you move? I'm sending agents to Harlan Falls tonight. 2 vehicles. They'll stage outside town. The moment we have confirmation that Angie and Lena are safe, we execute arrest warrants simultaneously. Brent Mercer in Harlan Falls, Garrett Foley in Culver County. Angie's extraction is tonight, 11 p.m. Back door of the house, alley behind Ridgecrest Lane. Who's handling it? Mara. Only Mara. No patches, no motorcycles, no club insignia. She goes in a civilian vehicle, picks them up, drives them to the safe location. Clean and quiet. My agents will be positioned 2 blocks north and 2 blocks south. If anything goes sideways, they move. And if Mercer wakes up? Salcedo paused. When she spoke again, her voice carried the blunt, surgical authority of someone who had managed 100 extractions and understood that the space between planning and execution was where people died. If Mercer wakes up and becomes a threat, my agents intervene. But Ryder, listen to me carefully. Your people stay away. No matter what you hear on the phone, no matter what your gut tells you, you are not law enforcement, and tonight is not the night to test that boundary. If your club shows up and something goes wrong, Mercer's attorney, whoever replaces Foley, Chicteroy, will use your presence to taint every piece of evidence we've built. Do you understand? I understand. Say it back to me. My people stay away. Good. I'll call when we have them. She hung up. Ryder put the phone on the counter and looked at Mara. You heard? I heard? Just you, the truck, no patches. Mara nodded. She was already running the route in her head. The street layout around Ridgecrest Lane, the alley access points, the distance from the back door to where she'd park, the number of seconds it would take a woman and a child to cross a backyard in the dark. I'll be at the alley entrance at 10:45. Engine off, lights off. When they come out, I flash the headlights once. They get in. We go. Where? The shelter Janine confirmed. 90 miles north. Private facility. No county connection. No paper trail. 90 miles. An hour and a half. By the time Mercer wakes up tomorrow morning and realizes they're gone, they'll be behind locked doors in a facility he'll never find. Ryder looked at the clock. 4:32 p.m., 6.5 hours. 6.5 hours of waiting while the gears turned and the agent staged and the warrants sat in folders ready to be served, and a woman on Ridgecrest Lane cooked dinner for the last time in a house where the closet was the safest room. He walked to the back office. Lena was still drawing. The row of motorcycles had grown, 8 of them now, each one slightly different, each one parked in front of the building with the sign that said safe. Lena, she looked up. Tonight, you're going to see your mom. The pencil stopped. Her hand went still. Her eyes, those 2 old eyes in that too young face, searched his face for the lie, for the qualification, for the but that always followed promises in her experience. She didn't find one. Where? Somewhere safe. Somewhere he can't go. For how long? For as long as you need. She put the pencil down. She closed the notebook. She sat very still for a moment, her hands in her lap, her shoulders doing something they hadn't done since she walked through the clubhouse door 4 days ago. They dropped. Not from exhaustion, from the release of a weight she had been carrying so long that its absence felt strange, like a phantom limb in reverse. Can I bring my drawings? Yeah, you can bring your drawings. She put the notebook in her backpack. She zipped it shut. She stood up from the desk and walked out of the office and sat in the main room at the table nearest the door and waited with the focused patience of a child who had finally been given a reason to believe that waiting might end in something other than disappointment. The hours passed. Evening fell. The temperature dropped to 15 degrees. The neon sign buzzed its broken name into the dark. Inside, the clubhouse held its breath. At 9 p.m., Ryder gathered the full table one last time. Not for a vote, not for a plan, just to stand together in the room and acknowledge what was about to happen and what it had cost to get here. Dutch was there. His breathing was worse tonight. Each inhale a negotiation between his lungs and the air, each exhale a small surrender. He sat at the end of the table and looked at the faces around him, and his eyes held something that might have been pride or might have been the bittersweet recognition of a man who had built something that was going to outlast him. "Whatever happens tonight," Dutch said, "this is what the club is for. Not the bikes, not the road, not the patches. This, right here. A room full of damaged people who decided to protect someone instead of looking away. That's the whole thing. That's everything." Nobody spoke after that. Nobody needed to. Jace cracked his knuckles. Pearl rolled a toothpick between her fingers. Tomas tapped his prosthetic once, click, and was still. Coop sat with his massive hands folded and his eyes closed and his lips moving soundlessly in a pattern that might have been counting or might have been the rhythm he used to keep himself steady when the world got too loud. At 10:30 p.m., Mara stood up. She pulled on a plain gray coat, no leather, no patches. She put her hair under a knit cap and slipped her phone into her pocket and picked up the keys to the truck. Ryder walked her to the door. They stood in the cold entrance with the parking lot behind them and the warm light of the clubhouse ahead, and the distance between the two felt like a border crossing. "Mara, don't." "Don't what?" "Don't say anything that sounds like goodbye. I'm picking up a woman and her kid and driving 90 miles. I've done harder things on a Tuesday." Ryder looked at her. She looked at him. For 3 seconds, the armor dropped, on both sides, and they were just two people who had survived things that should have broken them, standing in a doorway, about to do the only thing that made the surviving worth it. "Drive safe," he said. "Fix the neon sign," she said. She walked to the truck. The engine started. The headlights cut 2 white lines across the parking lot. She pulled onto the road and the taillight shrank, and then disappeared, and Ryder stood in the doorway, listening to the engine fade until the only sound was the wind and the buzzing sign above his head. He went back inside. He sat behind the counter. He looked at the clock. 10:38 p.m. The longest night of his life had just begun. Mara parked in the alley behind Ridgecrest Lane at 10:49 p.m. She killed the engine, killed the lights. The alley was narrow, one car wide, flanked by wooden fences and garbage bins, and the backsides of houses that all looked the same in the dark. She could see the back gate of the crosshouse 40 feet ahead. A single porch light burned above the back door. Everything else was dark. She checked her phone. A text from Salcedo. "Agents in position, standing by." She waited. At 10:56 p.m., the back porch light went off. Mara's hand tightened on the steering wheel. The darkness was complete now. No streetlights in the alley, no moon through the overcast sky, just the faint orange glow of the town's ambient light reflecting off the low clouds. At 11:01 p.m., the back door of the crosshouse opened. 2 figures emerged, one tall, one small. The tall one carried nothing, no bag, no suitcase, nothing that would have made noise or taken time. The small one wore a backpack. They moved across the yard in silence, their feet finding the path without hesitation. And Mara realized that Angie had rehearsed this. She had walked this route in her mind over and over during the 26 hours since the phone call. She had memorized the number of steps from the back door to the gate. She had counted the seconds. She had planned the silence. The gate opened. They stepped into the alley. Mara flashed the headlights once. Angie froze. Lena pressed against her side. For 2 seconds, nobody moved. Then Angie's hand found Lena's hand, and they walked toward the truck. Fast, controlled. The gait of people crossing a border between a life they were leaving and a life they couldn't see yet. Mara reached across and opened the passenger door. The interior light stayed off. She'd removed the bulb an hour ago. Angie lifted Lena into the back seat. Lena swung her backpack off her shoulder and held it against her chest and didn't make a sound. Angie climbed in front. She pulled the door closed with both hands, easing it shut to minimize the click of the latch. Mara started the engine. She didn't turn on the headlights. She backed out of the alley using only her mirrors and the faint reflection of ambient light, rolling at walking speed, the truck barely audible above the wind. At the end of the alley, she turned onto the cross street. She drove 2 blocks. Then she turned on the headlights and accelerated to the speed limit and merged onto Route 9 heading north, and the town of Harlan Falls shrank in the rearview mirror like something sinking. Nobody spoke for the first 10 miles. Angie sat in the passenger seat with her hands pressed between her knees, her body rigid, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. She was still in the house. Her body had left, but her nervous system hadn't caught up. Still scanning for sounds, still monitoring for footsteps, still holding itself in the posture of a woman who had spent 2 years making herself small enough to avoid collision. In the back seat, Lena watched the headlights of passing cars, each one a brief illumination followed by darkness, each one a possibility. Is that him? Is he following? Is it over? And then gone. At mile 12, Angie exhaled. Not a sigh, not a breath. An exhale that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs, from the basement of her body, from the place where she had stored every scream she never screamed and every no she never said, and every moment of clarity that she had immediately buried because clarity in that house was dangerous. He's going to come looking, Angie said. He won't find you. You don't know him. No, but I know what's waiting for him when he wakes up tomorrow. Angie turned to look at Mara for the first time. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, she saw the sharp cheekbones, the set jaw, the eyes that held a specific kind of knowledge, the knowledge of someone who had been exactly where Angie was sitting. You got out, Angie said. Not a question. 6 years ago, a different town, a different man, same locked doors. Angie looked back at the road. The mile markers passed, each one a small victory measured in distance. My daughter, she went to them, the bikers. She did. She carried a jar of coins. She did. She asked them to save me. She asked, and they said yes, every one of them. Angie pressed her hand against her mouth. The sound she made wasn't crying. It was something more fundamental, something tectonic, the sound of a fault line releasing pressure that had been building for years. It lasted 15 seconds. Then she lowered her hand and wiped her face and looked at the road again, and her jaw set in a way that Mara recognized because she had felt it in her own jaw 6 years ago. The moment when grief turns to granite, and a woman decides that whatever comes next, she will face it standing up. From the back seat, Lena's small voice, Mom? Yeah, baby. We're not going back? No, we're not going back. Ever? Ever. Lena unzipped her backpack. She pulled out her notebook. She opened it to the last page. The row of motorcycles parked in front of the building with the sign that said safe. She held it up so her mother could see it in the mirror. Angie looked. She saw the drawing. She saw the word. And she reached her hand back between the seats, and Lena took it, and they held on to each other while the highway unspooled beneath them, and the darkness slowly, mile by mile, became less absolute. They reached the shelter at 12:34 a.m. It was a converted farmhouse on 12 acres outside a town so small it didn't appear on most maps. A woman named Grace met them at the door. Mid-50s, steady hands, a face that had welcomed hundreds of arrivals at all hours, and never once made any of them feel like a burden. Mara walked them to the door. She didn't go inside. She stood on the porch and watched Angie and Lena step through the entrance into a hallway that smelled like clean laundry and chamomile tea, and the particular warmth of a place that had been built for the specific purpose of telling people they were safe and meaning it. Angie turned in the doorway. The jar, she said. Lena's coins. They're still at the clubhouse. They are. Keep them, please. Mara nodded. And tell the man with the scar, Ryder, tell him my daughter was right. It was enough. Mara stood on the porch until the door closed. Then she walked back to the truck and sat behind the wheel and pressed her palms against her eyes, the way Ryder pressed his and felt the tears come. Not many, not dramatic, just the quiet overflow of a woman whose body had been holding itself together for 5 days. And finally, in the privacy of a dark parking lot outside a farmhouse that saved lives, allowed itself 3 seconds of release. Then she started the engine and drove south. At 5:47 a.m., two federal vehicles descended on Ridgecrest Lane. The arrest warrant for Brent Mercer was executed at 5:52 a.m. He came to the door in a white t-shirt and boxer shorts and bare feet, his eyes squinting against the flashlights, his mouth already forming the shape of a denial that died when he saw the badges and the paperwork and the faces of agents who had read his file and knew exactly what they were looking at. He didn't resist. Men like Brent Mercer never resisted authority, only the people who had none. In Culver County, the simultaneous arrest of Garrett Foley was less quiet. Foley demanded to see the warrant, demanded to call his attorney, then realized that he was the attorney and the person he needed to call was himself, and the machinery he had spent years building to protect the Mercer family had just been dismantled by a federal agent with a phone full of text messages and a sister who had never stopped looking. Within 72 hours of the arrests, the investigation expanded. The burner phone records led to additional communications. The communications led to financial records. The financial records led to a property owned by Ray Mercer outside Culver County, a parcel of undeveloped land that had been purchased 18 months before Sharon Mercer disappeared. A federal forensic team was dispatched to the property. What they found there closed the case on Sharon Mercer's disappearance and opened a murder investigation that would eventually result in charges against both Brent Mercer and Garrett Foley. Nina Beckett received the call from Agent Salcedo on a Tuesday afternoon. She was sitting at her kitchen table in Grandview, in the duplex with the dented mailbox and the dead flowers on the porch. She listened. She said thank you once. She hung up. She sat at the table for a very long time. Then she stood and went to the porch and pulled the dead flowers from the ceramic planter and threw them away and stood there in the cold with her hands in the empty soil and the wind on her face and her sister's name in her mouth. Not spoken, just held there, like something precious that she was finally allowed to set down. Delia Marsh was located through the phone records. Her number was one of the 3 repeating numbers in the burner's call log. She had been receiving calls from Brent Mercer for 2 years. Not threats, not harassment, just silence. He would call and say nothing and let the line stay open for 30, 40, 50 seconds and then hang up. A reminder. A leash. A way of saying, I know where you are without ever speaking a word. When the FBI contacted her and told her the calls would stop, she asked them to say it again. They said it again. She asked a third time. They said it a third time. She needed to hear it 3 times before the part of her that had been bracing for 5 years allowed itself to uncurl. 2 weeks after the arrests, the town of Harlan Falls did what towns do. It rearranged itself around the absence of a man who had been hiding in plain sight. The hardware store took down Brent's baseball coaching photo from the community board. The fabrication plant issued a statement that said nothing. The neighbors on Ridgecrest Lane stood in their driveways and talked in low voices and said things like, I always thought something was off, and you just never know. And none of them mentioned that they had known, in the way that people always know, and had chosen the comfort of not knowing instead. Dale Crenshaw held a press conference. He stood behind a podium and praised the cooperation between local and federal authorities and used the word partnership 4 times and did not mention the Iron Haven riders or the fact that a 10-year-old girl had done more in one morning with a jar of coins than his entire department had done in 2 years of looking the other way. Deborah at Family Services put in a request for increased funding. It was denied. She put in another one. It was denied again. She put in a third. She would keep putting them in until someone listened or she retired, whichever came first. On a Saturday morning in February, 3 weeks after the night in the alley, the Iron Haven Riders opened their doors for the weekly community breakfast. The griddle was hot. The coffee was too strong. The jukebox was still broken. The neon sign outside had been repaired. All the letters lit now, Iron Haven glowing steady against the winter sky. Ryder had fixed it himself. It took him 3 hours and 2 trips to the hardware store and a YouTube tutorial in language that would have gotten him removed from polite company. But the sign worked. Every letter. For the first time in 4 years, the name was complete. Families filed in, old men with coffee cups, teenagers pretending they were only there for the eggs. The room filled with the noise of forks and conversation and children laughing and the particular unremarkable warmth of people being fed without conditions. At 9:15 a.m., the door opened. Angie Cross walked in. She looked different. Not transformed, not reborn, not any of the dramatic words that stories use to describe women who survive. She looked like herself. Her hair was down, her sleeves were pushed up to her elbows. She wore jeans and boots and a flannel shirt that was open at the collar, and she walked with the posture of a woman who had spent 3 weeks relearning what it felt like to move through a room without calculating the distance to the nearest exit. Behind her, Lena. Lena was carrying something, not a jar, not coins. A rolled piece of paper held in both hands, gripped with the same careful intensity she'd carried the jar. Like it was the most important thing in the world, and she was the only person who could deliver it. She walked through the room, past the families and the old men and the teenagers, past Mara, who stood near the counter with her arms crossed and her eyes bright and her jaw doing something it almost never did, trembling. Past Dutch, who sat in a chair by the wall with an oxygen tank beside him now, the clear tube running to his nose, his lungs finally conceding the fight they'd been losing for years. Past Pearl and Jace and Tomas and Coop, who stood together near the back like a wall made of scars and tattoos, and the quiet, massive presence of people who would step in front of anything to protect the ones behind them. Lena stopped in front of Ryder. He was behind the counter, spatula in one hand, coffee mug in the other. The scar on his face caught the morning light coming through the windows. Windows that were clean now, that let the sun in, that made the room bright enough to see every crack in the walls and every stain on the floor and every imperfection in a building that had never pretended to be anything other than what it was. Lena unrolled the paper. It was a drawing, 2 motorcycles riding side by side on a road that curved toward a horizon where the sun was coming up. The sun was drawn with the fierce, oversized confidence of a child who had decided that if she was going to draw light, she was going to draw more of it than any sky could hold. Below the motorcycles, in careful block letters, she had written 2 words. Thank you. She held it up. Ryder set down the spatula. He set down the mug. He took the drawing with both hands and looked at it, and his face did the thing it had done once before, in the doorway, watching Nina draw a door on a piece of paper. It showed everything. Every deployment, every door, every silence. Caleb in his red jacket, the jar of coins, the open truck door, the alley in the dark. All of it, surfacing at once, breaking through the scar tissue and the discipline and the years of holding everything below the waterline. He looked at Lena. She looked at him. And then she did something she hadn't done with anyone in a very long time. She stepped forward and put her arms around his waist and pressed her face against his chest and held on. Ryder's hands hovered in the air for a second. Then they came down, slowly, carefully, the way you handle something you're afraid of breaking, and rested on her shoulders. Mara turned away. She walked to the counter and poured coffee into 2 mugs and set one in front of Angie, who had taken a seat at the nearest table. Angie wrapped her hands around the mug and felt the warmth move through her palms and up her wrists and into the parts of her body that had been cold for 2 years. How's the shelter? Mara asked. Good. Lena started at a new school Monday. She hates the bus. She likes the teacher. And you? Angie looked at the coffee, at the room, at her daughter standing in the arms of a man who had chosen to protect a stranger's child because he couldn't protect his own. I'm here, she said. It was the most honest answer she had. Dutch watched from his chair by the wall. The oxygen hissed softly through the tube. His eyes moved across the room. The family's eating, the riders standing, the girl and the man at the counter, the drawing of 2 motorcycles riding toward a sun that was too big for the sky. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The room said it for him. Later that morning, after the breakfast crowd thinned and the griddle cooled and the tables were wiped down, Ryder walked to the shelf behind the counter. He picked up the photograph of Caleb. He looked at it for a long time. The blonde hair, the gap-toothed grin, the red jacket with the broken zipper held together by a safety pin. He didn't put it back on the shelf. He carried it to the wall near the entrance, the wall where the community board hung, covered in flyers for oil changes and yard sales and lost dogs. He took down a flyer. He hung the photograph in its place, not hidden on a shelf behind the counter, not tucked away where only he could see it, on the wall, in the open, where the morning light could reach it. Below the photograph, he pinned Lena's drawing, the two motorcycles, the impossible sun, the words, "Thank you." He stepped back. He looked at them together, his son and a stranger's daughter, connected now by a wall and a building and a choice that had been made in the space between grief and action. The jar of coins still sat on the shelf. Nobody had counted them. Nobody ever would. The jar had become something else now. Not money, not a transaction, not a child's desperate attempt to purchase safety. It was a marker, a monument, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing a human being can do is walk into a room full of strangers and ask for help. Mara came and stood beside him. She looked at the wall, at the photograph in the drawing and the light falling across both of them. "You fixed the sign," she said. "I fixed the sign. Every letter. Every letter." She nodded. She took a sip of coffee. Outside, the February sun hit the parking lot, and for the first time in weeks, the ice on the asphalt began to melt, sending thin streams of water across the gravel toward the road, carrying the winter away one drop at a time. The door of the clubhouse was open. The smell of coffee drifted out into the cold air. Somewhere down the road, a motorcycle engine started. Low, steady, the sound of something built to move through the world with weight and purpose. Inside, a 10-year-old girl sat at a table eating eggs and drawing birds with wings spread wide enough to carry them anywhere they wanted to go.